Well, I realize we're a couple minutes early, but since we want to get through this tonight, or at least that's our goal, go ahead and get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things. One, thank you so much for participating. I'd like to report that we have 13 of the 14 Budget Committee members in attendance, either in person or virtually. I think that, to me, is a record, at least the last 13 years that I know of. Always seems to be at least two that don't make it. And I'm also pleased how many people step forward to provide this service to our community. I hear from my peers that in other communities it's like pulling teeth to get people to get involved, and I do know that one of our sister cities locally did not get any applications to serve on the Budget Committee. So thank you, and your community thanks you. Probably the most important housekeeping thing is there are restrooms at the back. There is a code. We make it easy for us. We know you guys will probably remember it easily. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 pound. And then there's bathrooms with no code over here. So as we go through this, please feel free if you need to go. And when we have the budget chairs, then they'll decide when and if we have breaks. But I think to start out with, why don't we go ahead and do introductions, and why don't we go ahead and start with Councilor DeNovo and go around the room.
Okay, Lucinda DeNovo, Coos Bay City Council.
Harold Volker.
Stephanie Kilmer, Coos Bay City Councilor.
Rick Rayfeld, citizen.
Drew Farmer, Coos Bay City Councilor. I'm Eli Gonzalez.
Rob Miles, Coos Bay City Councilor.
Colleen Coco Sutton, citizen lay member.
Carmen Matthews, City Council of Coos Bay.
Brenda Brecky.
Sarah Stevens, Coos Bay City Councilor.
And I think we have two online.
Yeah, Joe Benet, Coos Bay City Council. Steve Moore as well.
Thank you. We'll just start with staff.
Carrie Toby, HR Coordinator, Executive Assistant.
Melissa Olson, Finance Director.
Nicole Rutherford, Assistant City Manager.
Roger Craddock, City Manager.
Jim Hossley, Public Works Director.
Jennifer Worsley, Deputy Director, City Engineer.
Excuse me, Sammy Pearson, Director of Library.
Christina Kaufman, Deputy Library Director.
Mark Anderson, Fire Chief.
Mike Schaefer, PD, Operations Staff. Tom Mundell, Administrative Captain. Chris Chapman, Police Chief.
Not only takes a village to raise a child, but it takes an entire administrative staff to explain a budget.
Yeah,
So,
indeed.
with that, we have always found in the last few years that it's always good to do an overview of municipal budgeting in the state of Oregon to kind of at least lay out the framework, and that kind of helps us as we move through this. And tonight, our Assistant City Manager will be giving that overview.
All right, thank you. So this is just a brief kind of outline of how we're going to attack this 101 budgeting here. We'll give a little bit of background, the mechanics of the actual budget document and our structure of funds. And then there will be some additional information that we'll see within this document itself. So background, we'll talk about what is a budget. It's a legal document. It gives us lawful rights through appropriations to spend public dollars. It's a financial plan for the city of Coos Bay. It's an annual plan. It's adopted annually, and we base that on estimates, our best estimates of revenues and expenditures. It's an internal control mechanism. Those of you who've been around a bit know we like to make sure our auditors are happy, and internal controls is one of those elements. Policy document for us. It funds the plans and policies, priorities of the city for this upcoming fiscal year. And it's a public communication tool. It's something that our citizens can use to see what the city's goals are. Public budget law, who makes those rules? Well, of course, the state of Oregon gives those rules that apply to all municipalities. It helps to establish some standardized procedures. Helps to also outline the programs and the fiscal policies that we should all work under. Again, requires an estimation of resources and expenditures. It helps to put a little bit of control on the expenditures of public funds. Also is the process is a big encouragement for citizen participation, both in what is happening here tonight with those of you who came in from our community to participate, and then also we do have this open, it's advertised for public to attend the meeting. The overall budget process, you'll kind of see this layout a little bit in the document itself, but there's essentially 3 steps to this process. City staff starts this process, the budget officer is determined, it's generally our city manager, and works with all of the management staff here, department heads at the city, to put together what is known as the proposed budget. That budget is what is presented to you tonight as a budget committee, and we will spend the next several hours discussing that. The object we're hoping to achieve by the end of the night is approval of that budget so that it then can be forwarded off to City Council, which they will meet in June to discuss. And that last step is City Council, and they will meet to discuss, again, hold another public hearing and adopt that budget, which then appropriates those funds for the next fiscal year. Also, additionally, we will use that adoption process to actually levy the taxes. So the budget committee that is established by ORS, it consists of our city council and then an equal member of citizens who have a willingness to contribute their time to the process. The primary roles of this budget committee is to listen to the budget message, which will come shortly, for both URA and the city. We must hold a public hearing. We need to make that this information available to the public. And it also state we're live on YouTube as we speak, hopefully. We should listen to and accept public comment. Their input is important in this process. We're going to review and discuss the proposed budget, make any revisions to that proposed budget that we deem necessary, and then approve the budget, which is going to entail that you're going to approve a tax rate and a dollar amount for any levy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So budget fund and structure. So the budget structure, we're going to be talking about 2 budgets tonight, the city's budget and our urban renewal agency's budget. And those are organized by funds. A fund is a self-balancing set of accounts. It's used to record those revenues, those resources and expenditures. And generally a fund is established when there's specific activities or objectives that need to be tracked independent. All resources and expenditures must be budgeted to the best of our estimation. All resources and expenditures must balance. We are tasked tonight with creating a balanced budget. Estimates of resources and expenditures are made in good faith. We are, as of this point in time, making the best estimate we can make based on the information we know. So this is an example of one of the funds within the city's budget. It's a little small, but this is just an example. It shows that it's all of our funds must budget or balance between resources and expenditures. Common types of funds. The city has 4 different types of funds. The primary fund is our general fund. That's where the operations of the city is recorded. There are enterprise funds within the city's budget. Those are the Water Quality Fund and the Building Codes Fund. And enterprise funds are funds in which the revenue needs to support the operations of whatever that specific service is. Special revenue funds, examples of that within the city's budget is state gas tax and the library. And capital improvement funds, debt service funds, and reserve funds. Reserves typically, like we all have, savings accounts. The city's budget currently has 16 active funds. The operating, or what we kind of considered our daily kind of funds, general fund, the gas tax, water quality, hotel motel tax fund, the library fund, library ESO fund, building codes fund, 911 tax fund, the debt service fund, it's a general obligation or bond redemption fund, capital improvement funds, we have two, the capital improvement fund and the system development charges fund. The reserve funds, we have a fire station reserve fund, a water quality improvement fund, jurisdictional exchange streets reserve fund, a CAD reserve fund, and a rainy day fund. Fund structures, funds have both, as we already kind of talked about, both resources and expenditures. The expenditure sections can have several categories. The first category typically is the personal services. That's where staff costs are at. Materials and services, those are the goods and or services that we need to perform whatever that fund's function is. Capital outlay is typically what we use to budget for large ticket items, things that we would capitalize, depreciate. Debt service, that just covers our bond payments, both principal and interest. Transfers are within funds within an entity. So the city can transfer within its own funds, the Urban Renewal Agency can transfer within its own funds. And contingency, which is an extra amount that's set aside, which we can use throughout the year if there's some unforeseen circumstances that occur. It does require a process for us to access those funds. We need to come to council and request those funds, and a resolution needs to be passed. And depending on how much, it could require supplemental budget and public noticing and hearings and things like that. And then there's potential to have a reserved item, and those are typically what you would see in your bond funds, where you're reserving funds for upcoming payments that are outside of the current fiscal year. And unappropriated. That is like a carryover for the following year. That's an untouchable amount. If you see an amount in unappropriated, we are truly saving that for a future period. There is no activity, no action that can give access to those funds in a current fiscal year. So this is an example of one of the divisions in the water quality that has each of those sections. So there's a personal services, materials and services. You'll see line items within each grouping, a total for each grouping. Debt service, transfers, and then there at the very bottom, the last three, contingency, reserves, and unappropriated, with a total expenditure line. Part of ORS requires that the format of the budget is specific, and that's across all municipalities. There are, I'm sure you guys probably already looked at your budget document, but so on the far left, there are two columns of actual audited figures presented. Then those two columns are followed by a adopted, that's the current fiscal year we're in right now. Those are the budgeted funds that we are currently working with. And then you'll have the account number and name, line item there, and name, and to the very right is the proposed column. Those are the budget amounts that we are bringing here tonight for your review and discussion. Once we work through tonight and we get an approved budget, we'll actually create another column, and that will be the approved column. The council will receive that budget then in June with those proposed and approved columns. Their process to adopt gives us that third column, which finishes off our document. You'll have 3 columns on both sides of those account numbers and names. So this is a fund with, well, a historic fund, but that will show those columns. So the 2 actuals and the current year's council adopted budget, the proposed budget we're going to discuss tonight. This is the GL account numbers, more for staff and accounting to code things, and the descriptions. So later on in the evening, if you want to discuss a specific line item, a description will work, or a GL account number and referencing. Okay, so the next step, we'll move from proposed over to committee approved. And then finally, a third column there for council adopted. So some additional information. We talked a little bit about property taxes. Oregon law allows governments to levy 3 different types of property taxes. A permanent rate levy, which is established obviously as a permanent rate, unchangeable. A general obligation bond levy, so those are levies that are intended to repay a bond issuance. You generally levy an amount equal to your year's debt service payments. A local option levy, which the city doesn't have, and that would just be, you could do that for like a streets project, you know, you want to have streets improvement, it goes to the voters, it's determined by the voters that that's something of interest. The city doesn't use that though. We are only currently using a permanent rate and a general obligation for the city's taxes. The city's permanent tax rate is $6.3643 per thousand of assessed value. We're estimating to collect about a little over $6.5 million in this upcoming fiscal year. And this revenue is brought in within the general fund. It is intended to cover the costs of general operations for the city. We do have a general obligation bond levy that was passed in May of 2008 with $6.9 million, and it was for the construction of the downtown fire station off of Elrod. In this next fiscal year, our bond levy amount is $494,700. This revenue will be used to pay the current period's debt service payment, and just add that it was refinanced in fiscal year 21. We saved over $800,000 on the total outstanding debt amount, and have a much lower interest rate. So it will be paid off about a year and a half in advance of what the initial period was. The Oregon Constitution places limits on property tax collections. The first Measure 5 was passed in 1990, which limited the combined tax collection for general governments to $10 per assessed value. So if the combined rates of all the general jurisdictions were in excess of that $10, there could be compression. Local option taxes are the first type of taxes that are compressed, and then that is followed by the permanent tax rate. And then Measure 50 was passed in 1997, which limited the growth in assessed value to no more than 3%. And that doesn't count for new construction, that's just growth in already existing properties. We are required to disclose our basis of accounting. The city uses a modified accrual basis of accounting, which in simpler terms just means that we recognize revenues as soon as they're available and measurable. They are considered available if they're collected, if they come to us within a current period or close enough thereafter that we can use those funds to pay current expenses. For the city, we consider that period to be 60 days. The budget committee process, these meetings are all subject to public meetings law. We must have a quorum, so thank you all for coming, so we make sure we meet that requirement. The committee can request additional information. Sometimes that may require a holdover. We call that the red line process, so you can ask a question. We may know that answer right off. If not, we can come back a little bit later, or we can just table that issue till towards the end, which we've done in the past, and handle all red lines all at once. It is required that a majority of this budget committee is required to take action on approving that budget. So just to recap, we have prepared a proposed budget, the management team, along with our budget officer, the city manager. We are now sitting at the budget approval process for your roles here to approve the budget process. And we will head off to council afterwards. So, that being said, we can start the next step.
So the next step for the urban renewal budget committee agenda is the election of officers. So at this point in time, I would entertain motions for the budget committee chair.
I'll move Drew Farmer be the Budget Committee Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for budget chair?
Everyone's eager to not be it.
Hearing none, I'll close the nominations. All in favor of Councilor Farmer being the urban renewal budget chair, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none, you are chair. I think your first act is to take nominations for vice chair and then secretary.
All right, we'll take nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate President or Councilor Miles for Vice Chair.
Second.
All right, no objections from Councilor Miles. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I wasn't going to wait till you responded. All right, motion passes. Nominations for secretary.
I nominate Counselor DeNovo for secretary.
Second.
We have a revenge motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Excellent. That puts us on to public comments. I don't think the public wanted to listen. I can't envy them. Or is there anyone online?
There is not.
It's lonely. All right. And that goes. So we have presentation of the budget message.
So, and I will just state that for the Urban Renewal Agency, as you know, a new position here at the city this year is the Assistant City Manager, and so the Assistant City Manager will serve as the budget officer for Urban Renewal.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll get started here with, there we go. So the intent for urban renewal is to improve specific areas of a city that are poorly developed or underdeveloped, and to eliminate lighting conditions so as to hopefully encourage economic development. Short way, its intent is to make something happen which maybe would not happen otherwise. revenue within urban renewal is used to carry out urban renewal activities, and it's derived mainly from tax increment funds. That's determined by the total tax rates, which includes permanent rates, geo-bond rates, and the local option rates, multiplied by the assessed property value, which then gives you a tax revenue and creates a base for that district. This, at the point of formation, creates a frozen base so that everything that is generated beyond that base in assessed value becomes a part of that urban renewal tax increment revenue. The City of Coos Bay has established two urban renewal districts, the Downtown District and the Empire District. Each of these two districts are accounted with three funds: a special revenue fund, a bond fund, and a capital project fund. There are limitations on the type of projects that can be covered by urban renewal resources. Examples of that would be real property acquisition or disposition for redevelopment, relocation of occupants of property acquired, public improvements such as to streets, streetscapes, utilities, site improvements, which could include public buildings, parks, and parking facilities, and then private property capital improvements. Other eligible expenses also include the costs of operating the actual agency. So that could be things like administration, planning, legal, financial services. Those are things that the city already has staffing for, and so those are operational costs that we can share then with the Urban Renewal Agency. ORS 457 requires that urban renewal tax increment revenues must be used to pay principal and interest on debt from loans. Those loans are used to finance the urban renewal projects. Coos Bay's Urban Renewal Agency uses both long-term debt and short-term debt, which is also known as de jure. Urban renewal bonds, which are used to finance those projects. The downtown debt that is currently outstanding is issuance that was done in fiscal year 19, $3.3 million, which was used for the purposes of purchasing a property and some preliminary cleanup there, traffic signal and rail crossing at the Coos Bay Village site, intended front street improvements, and some streetscapes. This loan we did refinance along with the GEO bond loan in 2021. Again, we were looking for a reduced interest rate, which saved the agency over $400,000. And it shortened the maturity. And then in fiscal year 20, the downtown district secured $3.4 million loan for the purpose of improving 4th Street, which is finished, I believe, entirely. All the trees are in, and that loan will mature in 2029. Empire has also two debt issuances. In fiscal year 18, the district secured a $1.45 million loan, and that was used to purchase the property on Ocean Boulevard and also cover the costs of the replacement of the Newmark Avenue seawall. This loan will mature in 2027. And in fiscal year 19, the district secured $2.85 million for undertaking some capital road improvements in the Empire District. And and this will matures in 2028. In the downtown district, all the projects are handled in the Capital Project Fund, which is Fund 57. There is a little over $4.6 million available for projects. Some of those examples would be some work on Front Street, and in the Coos History Museum area, $550,000. Some capital street improvements, $2.4 million. A couple of sidewalk improvements of $150,000. The business improvement program, $250,000. This is historically had been known as the facade improvement program. That was revamped a couple years ago to kind of expand what type of projects that program can cover. And then usually every year, once we've identified specific projects, there is some additional funds that are left. And so we just leave those in a yet-to-be-determined project. As we all know, things come up unexpectedly, and that gives us some capacity to do some projects in those districts. In the Empire Urban Renewal District, there's a little over $2.8 million available for projects. Some of those examples would be some additional capital street improvements out there, a little over $1 million. We have prepared $1 million for library site prep work and potential construction costs. The building improvement program out in the Empire area is estimated at $100,000. And then those undetermined projects, there's $407,000 there to pick up any unknown projects. Certain urban renewal agencies in specific circumstances can raise additional revenue beyond the tax increment funds, and that is done via a special levy. In the fiscal year 97-98, if an existing urban renewal agency received less revenue from their tax increment under Measure 50, which that limited the assessed value growth by 3%, if they received less than what they would have received pre-Measure 50, they could impose a special levy to make up that difference. For the last 5 years, the downtown district has elected to do that, to have a special levy in the downtown district only, and it has so far been limited to 28% of what the maximum allowed could have been levied in that district, and that is what is being proposed in this year's budget as well. Historically, those funds have been dedicated for capital road improvements in the downtown district. This budget presented to you tonight proposes to collect $490,000 in special levy, and again, that 28% total allowable. And that is the end of our introduction for the budget. And I just know that Allie has joined us.
Huh. Cool. Alrighty, that takes us to the proposed budget. So we can either start looking at your packets or your online version, whichever you prefer. Going through the urban renewal one, you've got who's on the committee in the start. We flip through the budget message, and we are at overviews. Does anybody have a question on overviews? We didn't look at overviews. We did a little. Summary of expenditures, summary of resources. Anybody with questions? I might have gone past people.
What page?
6 is a good start. Oh, 5, yeah, 6. There you go. Any questions on 6? How about 7? And 8, the bonds and coupon redemptions. 9, summary of resources, which needs to and does balance against 10, the summary of expenditures. 11, special revenue fund. And 12, special revenue fund. 13 is the Empire Program Fund, which kind of disappeared there.
So, one thing I guess to share just generally across, we talked earlier about the city having 16 funds and urban renewal having 3 funds. Historically, we've had more funds in both the city and the urban renewal budget, but our auditors had been encouraging us for several years to reduce those funds to a reasonable amount that's necessary for accounting purposes. And we finally took them up on that last year. So in this year, we closed those funds. You're gonna have to see these funds in our budget. As we see those columns age off, they will be presented here. You will notice those funds, if there's zeros in that proposed column, that's because those are the ones we've closed. And they're being presented for historic purposes only.
Right. And that's one of those things to know, is even if it's a one-time payment that happened in 2019, 2020, you're still going to see a line item that might have been 0 ever since because something happened in that line. And you're hearing us reference funds a lot. You'll notice at the top it'll say Fund 54, Fund 53. When you're looking at the GL account code near the middle, the first 2 digits, that is where the fund designation is. And then it trails from there. And page 14 is your downtown bond fund. That does still exist. Page 15, Empire Bond Fund. Page 16, Downtown Program Fund, must have been one of the consolidations.
Yes. The program funds were closed into the capital funds for the respective districts.
And Downtown Capital Project Funds on page 17. Page 18, Capital Project Funds.
I have a question.
Yes.
3124 street infrastructure, are there specific projects identified for that yet?
Pretty big jump.
Which page are you on, sorry?
So
18.
page 18. And that street infrastructure in in downtown is where our special levy funds are. So as we don't use those each year, they accumulate. And then there was, we still have about 700,000 left in the 4th Street project, which will help fund some other streets. I think some of the trees,
Yes.
streets, yeah.
So there are several streets that have been identified, Alder, Cedar, and Date, that have been identified and are currently undergoing design. So we hope to have those come later this year, but in reality, we're going to be trying to coordinate those when we actually do the Front Street parking lot so that we don't end up putting something in and only having another project have to be tear that portion of that out.
Are we still letting utilities and all them know it's last call to make improvements so they don't cut up our new roads?
That is correct.
Excellent.
Drew, 3107 Front Street and Coos History Museum. I thought we'd had conversations that the entire 500K would go to Front Street and not necessarily the Coos History Museum. Can you give us some more detail about that?
You're correct. The reason the Coos History Museum is on there, we do have funding this year of $250,000, and the project, which will be coming to the agency at your next work session, is a waterfront walkway that will basically continue the waterfront walkway at Coos Bay Village down to the southern border of their property. Now that project will probably get, I'm assuming, approved this year, but it may not get completed this year. So while it's on here now, what'll happen is, if it's not completed this year, through a supplemental budget process, after we begin the new budget year, we'll transfer those remaining funds over. So it'll still hold the line item, but currently, based on the budget philosophy imparted to us from the agency, you asked us to put in $500,000 to that for the purpose of beginning to take on some beginning projects to fulfill the yet-to-be-approved Front Street Blueprint plan. And that is nearing its completion as well. I believe there's a meeting before the Planning Commission later this month. And then hopefully adoption of that Front Street plan, which has been a year in the making, coming up, I believe, at our second meeting in June.
Roger, can you remind me also, what, $250,000 was the cost of the plaza for the Coos History Museum?
No, not the plaza. That's only the, I think it's I can't remember if it's an 8 or a 14-foot wide walkway.
The walkway, okay.
And it's quite a distance. It also includes stainless steel railings, one retaining wall, a set of steps, and an ADA ramp.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Roger, or Nicole, 3150, the roof was allocated for $700,000, came in lower. Those funds that were, where did they go? When the general carry over?
Yes, they will go and carry over, and then essentially they're sitting in the portion of the pot that's urban renewal projects to be determined. Which is 789,000. Account number 3123.
And you will recall this last year that the agency asked to add some additional dollars to the business improvement grant through a supplemental budget process.
And I explained fund number, I didn't explain account number. When you're looking for the account number that's being referenced, the 4-digit number, that is the number on the far right, under that GL line. And slow me down if I'm going too fast, because I am prone to do that. Any other questions on 18?
Yeah, I would say just like a brief pause on each page would be nice, just to kind of make sure. we're all-
Okay. Page 19. Fund 58, departments.
So the 3123, the urban renewal projects, is that the one you were referencing, Nicole?
That is the unidentified project.
Yeah.
So Empire has 407,000 in that bucket.
So that's where it is. Perfect. Okay.
No other questions? All righty. Page 20 is Fund 60, Downtown Bond Reserve Fund. That one consolidated as well?
There's 2 reserve funds, both Downtown and Empire, and those consolidated into the corresponding actual debt servicing fund. So those reserved amounts now sit over in that.
Cool. Page 21, Fund 61, Bond Reserve Fund of Empire, also consolidated. And that seems to have wrapped up the urban renewal.
It's obviously much easier than the city, quite a few pages less.
Staff is the reason this is that quick. Alrighty, so option 1. I lost track of my stuff.
No problem. As there were no red lines and no proposed changes, the next course of action would be to make a motion to select option 1, which is a required element of the approval process. So if it pleases the Budget Committee, we would request that you make a motion to approve selecting option 1 pursuant to ORS 457-435, subsection 2A, as the method used to collect urban renewal property taxes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Option 1 passes.
Another motion that's required was related to the special levy. So if it pleases the Budget Committee, make a motion to approve imposing the Urban Renewal Agency's maximum amount of the division of taxes and to impose the special levy option of the downtown plan limited to 28%.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And then we have the motion to approve the fiscal year budget for 2022-2023. Questions, comments, concerns?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed budget for the 2022-2023 fiscal year and forward to Urban Renewal Agency for adoption at the June 7th, 2022 meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, and urban renewal budget is completed.
Well, I would like to thank the Budget Committee for that and for your service on that board, and we'll start afresh. We now need to elect officers for the city's Budget Committee. I would open the nominations for chair.
I'll make a motion that Councilor Farmer is chair of the city budget.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the nominations. All in favor of Councilor Farmer serving as the city's budget chair, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none, I'll turn the election of the vice chair and the secretary over to you, sir.
All righty. Do we have nominations for a vice chair?
I nominate Rob Miles.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Rob drew the short straw. Do we have nominations for secretary?
I'll make a motion for Coco Sutton to be secretary.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Coco is the secretary. All righty.
So
And-
then, oh, sorry, you have public comments. I was
No,
getting ready to jump right in there.
No, presentation went before it. Or wait, no, I'm sorry. The hearing comes. So public comments? Anybody? No? All righty. Roger has it.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to share that the proposed budget's been prepared based on some city policies and practices, and it's been brought up before, but revenues are estimated conservatively, and expenditures are based on actual experience and incremental increases where needed. Resources are to be maintained at an adequate funding levels in accordance with accepted accounting principles and practices, and to provide sufficient cash carryover, which we'll talk about in more detail, to cover the city's needs until the next revenues are arrived in November received. And capital equipment, such as vehicles, should be maintained and or replaced so that they're kept in working order. And while the city's budget is a one-year document, we use a multi-year approach so that we can consider future impacts of decisions we're requesting this year. Total funds in the city's budget is just over $67 million, and that includes a little over $10.5 million for water quality improvements and a little over $3 million in street capital improvements. That's in addition to the money that we're setting aside through urban renewal for capital street improvements. As was shared in the budgeting overview, we do have 16 funds. You'll see how that's broken up between the operating funds, debt service, operations, and capital funds as far as percentage, and overwhelmingly the operational funds are the largest. And then we must have an older version on there. So the pie chart as far as operating funds, and I'm sorry it's hard to see, but you can see the breakdown of the funds, the largest being the general fund as far as revenues, and the second largest is our water quality utility. From there, it breaks down from the library fund, the gas tax fund, hotel motel fund, 911 tax, and then looks like the ESO fund, and then down to the building codes fund in size. As far as debt service, it's much easier this year than it has been in years past because of the consolidation of funds. There is really only one debt service fund, and that is for our general obligation bond for our downtown fire station. And I will cover it later, but the reality is we'll be able to retire that debt in June of 27. And that year, that debt service will be down to $138,000. So we are making progress on that debt service. As far as capital improvement, consistent with the high cost of operating a water utility, a wastewater utility, our water quality improvements is our largest capital. And in reality, that reflects a policy decision and a good stewardship decision of investing and reinvesting in that infrastructure. And then we have other capital improvements at 30%, and then the smallest, the 2%, is the system development charges. And we'll talk about that when we get into that budget, but there was a moratorium that was put in place on system development charges back in 2009. And the theory behind that decision was we were going through a recession, and there was a thought that if we had additional fees, that could only further stifle economic development. Reserve funds, by and large, the largest one is the jurisdictional exchange fund, and maybe that needs a little explanation. Jurisdictional exchange is basically, back in 2000, ODOT approached the city and asked the city to take over maintenance responsibilities and ownership of, I believe it's 16 miles of formerly state highway. The city agreed to do that for $4.8 million. You will see as you go through your budget, we still have that $4.8 million, and by a policy decision and through a city charter amendment, we are only allowed to use interest off that $4.8 million in undertaking street improvements on those roads. I think that was a wise decision back then because we still have that $4.8 million. Otherwise, it would probably have been spent. Our next largest is the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund was began in 2008, I believe, and a portion of our carryover, 2.5%, is placed in that rainy day fund every year, and that continues to grow. It has very stringent guidelines on how that money can be spent, and it actually takes a super majority of the council to make a decision to use any of those funds. And then we have what's called CAD, or Computer Aided Dispatch Reserve Fund, and we also have a fire equipment reserve fund. You'll hear later on that fire equipment is one of the most expensive single purchases that we can make, anywhere from $500,000 for an engine to nearly $2 million for a ladder truck. The carryover balance, it was talked about earlier. Carryover is just basically the funds that we have left over at the end of the year, and they're used, in essence, to carry us over from July 1st until mid-November when property taxes come in, since property taxes is one of the majority revenue sources. So we have two choices as a municipality. We either make sure that we have sufficient carryover so that we can pay our debts between July and November, or if we don't, then we have to resort to going out for a short-term loan. Obviously, the best practice is to have a carryover because that you actually are not paying loan fees and interest. Our problem is that property taxes in and of themselves are not keeping pace with expenses. And part of that is because of Measure 50, there's a limitation on how much assessed value can increase. Unfortunately, some of our other expenses don't know that limitation. So our goal is always to watch how we're trying to match our revenues with our expenses. But when expenses exceed revenues, what happens is the balancing point is the carryover. And our goal is always to try and to make that healthy. It's a battle every year. This budget includes using anticipated revenues from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, not only to make up for lost revenues during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to build back and make sure that we have a healthy carryover. And I can tell you back in, I think, 2002, 2003, the city was at an imbalance, and that resulted in major layoffs and affected not just our personnel, but really the quality of services that we deliver to our citizens, because that is first and foremost. That's our goal, is to deliver services.
Roger, may I ask, that fund, aren't we required to spend the monies by 2023?
We actually need to have them spent by 2024.
2024, okay.
Or have them obligated.
Okay,
And I believe we have through 2026 to clear that obligation.
great, thank you.
I mentioned about the layoffs in the early 2000s, which is a nice segue into the fact that, you know, the city provides most of our services to our citizens through our employees. This budget projects 133 employees, and one of our budget committee members goes, well, wait a minute here, didn't we have not quite 110 last year? Where did all this extra money come from? And so what we have is this last year, the city took over operations of our water quality. We used to call it wastewater, but I like that term, water quality. It's was a cleaner term, yeah. But it really is about water quality. We treat and clean up wastewater, and it becomes clean water, which is recirculated back into our bay. In addition, we had to right size because of water quality. We also had another enterprise, our building codes, and I don't know if you've noticed, there's a lot of development going on, which requires more reviews, more inspections, and so we had to right size that department. In addition, we are going through a period of change in personnel. The city is fortunate that it's been able to attract and retain long-term employees, but at certain periods in a course of a number of years, it seems like a number of employees retire. And then there are closeout costs for long-term employees. This budget also reflects not only anticipated closeout costs, but because of the American Rescue Plan dollars, specifically for the police department, we have a number of employees retiring, and it can take up to 18 months to train brand new officers up. So we are hiring ahead of time so that we can get some additional officers trained up before our retiring officers leave and go out the door. As you'll see, personnel expenses, 27% of the total operating budget, and 67% of those expenses are salaries, and 33% are benefits. And those benefits can include the range from retirement to medical, dental, vision, disability. While the budget does reflect 4% cost of living, and I will share that those are negotiated. We have, of our employees, we have 4 work groups. 3 of them are unions. We have the police union, the fire union, and what I call the everybody else union, which is library, finance, public works, and then we have non-represented, which is our management team. As you know, cost of living index is up, and while it is, I think the most recent is a little over 8%, we are looking at a 4% cost of living adjustment. While that is a controllable and negotiable number, what's not controllable is the public employers retirement system. We don't get to negotiate that. Those are dictated to the city, and I would share that once we're in the PERS system, we're in the PERS system for life. We are not able to get out, and that's based on Oregon revised statutes. Our other uncontrollable expense that we don't have control over is our health insurance rate. This budget reflects a anticipated 10% increase in our insurance rates. And when I say anticipated, we actually won't know that number until next year. Just to give you the gravity of those employment costs as far as PERS and health insurance, it's $5.5 million. So it's a large expense that we have to cover. And now you may remember that our property taxes that we anticipate getting in is just over $6.5 million. So what we'll have coming before you is our recommendation as to what we believe is an effective use of city resources and necessary to provide the services that we'll be providing to our citizens. This next coming budget, there'll be a number of presentations as we go through this, and you'll get to hear from a number of our staff that are subject matter experts in their divisions.
And that took us to the void. All righty. Next item, public hearing, citizen input on the use of state revenue sharing funds.
So maybe a little bit of information to that. The city participates and receives state revenue sharing funds, and under Oregon revised statutes, in order to be eligible for those, you have to hold this public hearing and take public input.
Public input?
Is this a good time to declare a perceived, you know what I'm talking about?
You can.
Conflict of interest?
Councilor Miles has a perceived conflict of interest. The city has in essence, a contract with Boys and Girls Club, and we provide the Boys and Girls Club approximately $10,000 a year to provide some services on behalf of the city. Although I would say that that is a perceived conflict of interest because those go for specific programs and does not go to your salary.
That is correct.
All righty. I should disclose that at least one of my board members' agencies is applying for a grant. But
And again, I'll just say that is a perceived conflict of interest and not an actual one because that goes to pay for actual cost of that service, and that'll be costly.
So just to clarify, Roger, they do not need to recuse themselves from the vote.
They do not, but under state ethics law, it's important to disclose the conflict or potential conflict.
Thank you.
Excellent. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing. I forget if that takes a vote.
Yep.
No, actually, you can close it.
Oh, okay. I closed the public hearing. And that takes us to the budget.
And
So
so I would just suggest you go down to page 18. Prior pages prior to 18 are just informational. They provide you an overview of resources and expenditures. And then we can actually start on 18 and get you down to the actual meat of the budget.
Excellent.
And I will take this one here. This is general fund, and it is specifically, this section is related to the city council. You will notice that there is not personnel expenses related to the city council, and that's because the city council serves as volunteers. There are other cities where councils are compensated, but this is not one of them. So what you have here is just materials and services. Generally what staff will do as we go through here, we won't go through line by line, but we're going to point out some what appears to be glaring changes from years past. And specifically in this one, you'll probably see 2108, which seems to be a huge difference, basically $75,000. Basically, the current budget reflects special projects related to updating the city's website and considers a potential project in this room of updating our sound system. And if you've listened to our sound system online, you know why it needs to be updated. We have a sound mixer in the back that is probably older than a number of our employees. So, but that's the big difference, and you'll see this from year to year. There may be a special project one year, but it won't repeat itself.
Roger, I'm sorry, did you say 2108 under contractual? So,
Yes,
okay. So we went from 95K to 20K, is that correct?
that's correct.
And we feel like that is enough for the sound system and the website updates?
That's correct. Now, if that doesn't happen this year, then as we get into the next year, there'll be a supplementary budget process to
Okay.
move that money forward.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, I think what you're asking is the 95 and this year is when we expect to be spending those funds, to explain the difference between why it's now 20.
Perfect, thank you. That was the question.
Is there any questions about any of the other line items?
Hearing none, we can keep moving. And if anybody was wondering, page 125 is where there's a start of definitions of terms that may be in here. So if that helps anybody, that's where that's hanging out.
Like any other government, we're horrible with acronyms. We have lots of them, so that's why we have that description page in the back. The next one is the city manager's budget. And you'll see that there are differences, and we should probably explain that we used activity-based accounting for our personnel. We don't track our time, but we estimate what time we're going to spend in different divisions. So you'll see that maybe you're going to wonder, well, wow, there's 3 people in this budget. Do they really get, is it just this much to pay those personnel? And you'll find it's not, because those are spread out. For myself, I spend time with wastewater, with gas tax, with hotel motel tax, all those funds. So we use our time in all those, and we try to show how the expenses of the city go and spread those out. This year we had a change in the city manager's office. One, we had a retirement, and we have a new employee, Carrie, but she's also taken on some additional duties with HR. And then, of course, we have a new position with the assistant city manager. The other one I was going to point out that's obvious change is meetings, travels, and dues. And you would think, oh, wow, you have a couple more people there. Aren't you going to do more training and travel? The reality is, COVID has taught us how to be more efficient with our time, and many meetings are still virtual, and it allows us to cut our costs as far as travel per diem.
It's like you can read my mind, Roger. I was just about to go there.
And it saves hours of your life.
It does.
Traveling. Any other questions? Alrighty, moving on to Urban Renewal Administration, page 22. Numbers appear on page 24.
And I'm going to take that one. This is essentially the cost of staff and materials, goods to manage the Urban Renewal Agency's projects. You'll see this total here, the $666,000 in this grouping is what's shared on the Urban Renewals, both Downtown and Empire's capital projects fund as an agency management fee. And it's split up based on the total amount of their projects. It's just a ratio of those dollars. So on this budget, Roger's kind of already indicated, we look each year at salaries, and so allocations have changed based on what projects we believe are happening in urban renewal. The other thing that I would add, and you'll see this across the rest of the budget, is a significant difference in workers' compensation. We, in this current fiscal year, in 21-22, we are with City County Insurance, and in this current fiscal year, they partnered with SAFE. So we started our workers' comp program with SAFE in this current fiscal year, and SAFE has significantly lower rates. Our 21-22 budget was estimated at CIS rates, so those are higher rates. That 21-22 number is larger than what we are expending actually under SAFE. So you'll see that across the board. There are some that stand out a little bit more like a sore thumb than this one does. Outside of that, really it's just those allocations in the personnel, not much drastic difference throughout, unless anyone has any questions.
I noticed salaries were down.
Yes, so that is essentially from the allocation of personnel time. So if we look into next year, what do we think we're going to be tackling as far as projects go? In the urban renewal area, we had last year, we had 4th Street going full force. We had some street projects happening in the Empire area. So there was some greater time was being spent there. We don't have any large significant projects planned, rather some kind of smaller ones. So that allocation number is different. It's lower this year.
And I'm assuming when the library measure when that passes, because we're just in a planning phase, there's not as much staff time involved in that process, correct? Thank you.
That was why I was wondering.
And I was just going to ask, so it's just better allocation, not necessarily better estimation, it's just the projects are different.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're on the subject of the allocations, I'm getting the impression that's more quantitative rather than qualitative, or vice versa. Qualitative process rather than quantitative. There's no time sampling or any other statistical techniques applied to allocating those times. It's your best judgment based on what you think is going to happen the next year, or what you're planning doing the next year.
It helps us, and I'll always say that it helps us to, instead of tracking our time, we can spend our time doing our work.
Understand, I've been involved in lots of these, and they're always a punt regardless of how scientific you try to make it.
Yes.
All righty. If there are no further questions, I noticed I breezed past the 1 hour mark. Did anybody need a 5-minute break?
Keep it
Want to
going,
take
Drew.
a 5-minute break? All righty. Lucinda's going to keep me moving. We've got Finance Department.
And I'll take that one. Overall, you'll see personnel services has gone down. We've had the same allocation changes, but most also taking Nicole's position out of the finance department and moving it to city manager's office, and we have a small key staff.
Questions on finance?
And I will say that this is generally a hallmark of how the budget works. Generally, if there's not a necessary change, you usually find some status quo budgets.
Yeah.
Alrighty. City attorney, page 27 and 28 on the document.
I will take that. The city of Coos Bay, instead of contracting with an attorney, our city attorney is a part-time attorney for us, and he has been for, I think, 18 years. So we just use him 17 hours a week. And again, for him, the cost of his salaries and expenses are spread over a number of different divisions. I think that's detailed on page 119 or somewhere close to that. And then you'll see the only difference generally in materials and services under special counsel. And I would just share that there are times through the course of the year that the city has to contract with a subject matter expert, whether that is similar to last year, we had to, I think it was the year before last, no, it was last year, someone that specialized in wastewater contract expertise, as we were ending a relationship with a former contractor. In the past, we've also used a land use expert in Oregon law. Those are specialized, and that's when we use someone to assist us with those.
Any questions on that page? That takes us to City Hall, page 29 and 30. Oops.
Drew, it sounds like Mayor Benetti would like to take a 5-minute break.
Oh,
Is that
okay.
acceptable? We didn't ask him. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Okay.
Cinda overrode you. Pages 29 and 30 then, City Hall.
All right, so this accounts for the cost of kind of managing this facility here. Utilities, telephone, contractual, which is generally cleaning services. There are some other kinds of services here. And janitorial supplies, things like that. We did have some expectation in this current fiscal year. You'll see the 75,000, where we were contemplating some potential flooring changes and some work out on the front railing system. We're still hopeful for that. If we don't get those things done, that's like we've talked about already, those funds can just roll over into the following year. We'll do supplemental budget to increase that current 40,000 up to necessary.
That was going to be my question, because it seemed like it was low, and I know how maintenance always gets cut when you got to cut somewhere, and it can be costly down the line, so I was concerned about that.
Yep. Good question.
Alrighty.
Sorry,
Nobody has
Drew,
a
can we
question?
go back? I apologize.
What's that?
Can we go back to telephone expenses?
Yeah.
I've made calls here on several occasions, and sometimes the telephone system has not been the very best. Do we have any plans to fix that in the coming year?
So I have some information from another company who provides similar telephone service. I just haven't moved forward with that.
Okay.
Because we have a few
Other projects? Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we do appreciate that. I know I think our police department struggles with some of those challenges as
Yeah.
well, so.
I was calling them, so yes. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty. 31, 32, community contributions. That is grants given out. I forget, do we usually bump that to the end, or?
We do. I don't think you'll need to do that this year. Maybe, let me give you some background. Earlier in this meeting, you held a public hearing about revenue sharing. Basically, revenue sharing is a portion of funds that are shared with the city. If we follow certain criteria, that money generally comes from OLCC in large part. And I would say OLCC liquor tax and not OLCC marijuana tax. Comes through a different fund. The city has chosen for a number of years to take a portion of that revenue sharing that we get from the state and share that with other agencies within the city. More often than not, that has been shared with those agencies that assist the city or lessen the impact of providing services to our citizens. Summary, we go out and we notify agencies that we're taking applications. In years past, there's been more applications and more requests than there's been available revenues, and decisions have to be made. I don't think that that's the case this year, and let me just summarize that you have a request from AYA, or Alternative Youth Activities. They're doing a great service. They're actually using their students or their youth, and they're paying them to go do trash collections, and that's generally cleaning up homeless camps, or the mess that's left from a former homeless camp. Kids Hope Center is asking for a modest $2,000 for Family Fun Day. Excellent activity. Hard to believe that that's all that cost them. It's a great day, and if you've been out there, it's a lot of fun. Habitat for Humanity is asking for $10,000 for critical home repair. One of the council's goals is to increase or maintain housing stock that fits with that goal. CASA, court-appointed advocates, $5,000. This is one that's been used in the past. It obviously has a direct correlation with our law enforcement. Those are some of those clients of theirs, or clients of the police department, or at least descendants of their clients. Southwestern Oregon Veterans Outreach has also asked for $5,000. They have also been funded in the past. And then, not a grant request, but an obligation, was the one we mentioned earlier, was the $10,000 to Boys and Girls Club. I would tell you, we don't get a better deal. We entered into that arrangement many years ago when the city had to stop providing a Parks and Recs department. Obviously, the services provided and those programs provided cost far more than $10,000. It would be my recommendation, and I think there's budget capacity to fund each of those grants at the requested amount.
So this is the first time we've been able to fund all of the requests, correct? At least since I've been on council.
We actually did that last year.
Did we? Okay.
And it actually went one step farther because we had a couple that didn't request funding. So the agency, or the budget committee suggested, and the council also approved, putting some discretionary funds in. And those funds were allocated out.
Thank you, Roger.
I personally would like to do that again, just because, as you know, we get requests throughout the year for certain things, and I think it would be nice to have a fund should the council choose to do that.
So you could do one of two things at this point. You could either redline that, or if the committee, I always want to say agency, if the committee wishes, you could make that as a motion, and if there's a second and a majority, but I would suggest that you determine if you're going to put some in there, how much you're going to put in there, and then the balancing point would be the carryover.
We can just redline it and talk about it at the end.
Like that.
All right.
So we would be redlining,
2460.
thank you.
Is it 2460 or 2451? Discretionary.
2451.
51, okay.
Because there's nothing in there
My
now.
mistake.
Yeah, I guess.
Any other conversation on this page, or we'll just come back to all of it?
Just one question, for clarification, so the rest of the committee, and 100,000 coming in 2440 is not there this year. Can you explain what that was, why it's not there this year?
I'd be happy to. Last year, and I think it's been over the last 18 months, we participated and was the grant recipient for a CDBG or Community Development Block Grant. We partnered with Neighborhood Community Works, and they did housing rehabilitation with those funds.
Yep. All righty. We have no others. We're at non-departmental, pages 33 and 34.
All right, so this is what I'll chat with you about. Again, we'll have those allocation changes in personal services. Non-departmental is kind of intended to catch those items that are not really identifiable to a specific department or division. Examples would be a large portion of our mechanics salary sits in here. We have two other employees of building maintenance tech, facilities maintenance tech. A large portion of their salaries sit in here too. They're just not reasonably allocated across the funds. And then the rest are kind of general overhead costs. You see the largest portion in here is insurance. It's our property liability insurance.
Drew, I have a question. 2320. How could library building maintenance possibly go down, given the challenges that we still have with the library?
This one actually can fluctuate. It just depends on the needs, and I will share that just today, one of our major HVACs went out, and I say it's not repairable. So we're hoping that a vote passes in a couple days,
Okay.
or we're gonna have to make some decisions on how we get that unit back up and running.
So if we didn't have enough money next year, we could just do a supplemental budget? There's no need to redline this, correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Looking at year-to-date, just in that one line item, we've budgeted 25,000, but we've only spent a little over 2,000 year-to-date. So
Okay.
it does fluctuate a bit.
There are different funding sources for
Right.
library maintenance.
Great, thank you.
Would there be a distinction in there then between this maybe as the standard maintenance and then there being something that's more like a capital improvement fix like the roof?
Yes, the capital improvement for the roof was actually funded through the building improvement program through urban renewal.
Okay. Other questions on this one? All righty. Other financing uses and expenditures, pages 35 and 36 on the document.
All right, and that's me. So this covers all of kind of the odds and ends. It's our debt service, our transfers, and our interagency transactions with the Urban Renewal Agency, contingency unappropriated. You'll see in the debt service, historically the city had a revenue bond fund, which covered all the other debt service beyond general obligation. The items in that fund were split. The stuff related to water quality went to water quality, and the city has several loans for the benefit of the water board, because we are one of the two parties in that, City of North Bend, City of Coos Bay. So that's our kind of share of those loans. It's just a balancing in and out there. I don't know if there's any specific questions that we want to look at. The de jure financing, and we didn't really talk about that, I guess, in urban renewal, but we did talk about urban renewal operates in a status of debt. So tax funds are used just to pay off debt. So the de jure is kind of that balance of whatever long-term loans we have. The rest of the funds that we receive need to be paying debt. That's the short term, the city loans short-term funds to the urban renewal agency.
And maybe another way of saying that, although we get some property taxes in or tax increment funds in from urban renewal, we cannot spend that until it's turned into debt. And so a legal way of turning it into debt is to do a overnight loan from the city, and then we return that back, and now we've legally made it into debt, but it also is the most cost-effective way to do that. So we're not paying loan servicing fees, and we're not paying large interest rates to a bank or another lender.
I give you the miracle of government.
So this just applies between the city government and urban renewal districts
That is
in these
correct.
short-term loans
That's correct.
and other benefits to them.
Alrighty, thoughts, questions, concerns? There are a couple where I jump around with big numbers. Contingency, of course, moved quite a bit, but we had ARPA funds playing a role in here.
Yes.
Alrighty. Pages 37 and 38 describe the police department. The numbers themselves start on page 39. I believe the chief will have that one.
I will. Thank you. Good evening. Tonight I will be presenting my budget proposal for the police department as well as our communication 911 center. Currently, the police department is budgeted for 24 sworn officers, and that includes 2 captains and myself. In addition to our sworn personnel, we have some non-sworn to include 3 record specialists, an evidence technician, a community service officer, and we also have a variety of volunteers. Within our police department, we also have a full 911 emergency dispatch center with budgeted 13 full-time emergency dispatchers. I'll be covering the dispatch budget tonight as well, and that starts in Fund 242 and also in Fund 10. In addition, when we get to Fund 10, I'll be sharing some information, some major changes that took place in our dispatch center and why the budget looks the way it does, and that's Fund 10. That being said, on the police side of the house, our department is comprised of administrative, operations, investigations, and support services. Our police operation delivers law enforcement and investigative services to the community. Our police officers handle over 30,000 calls for law enforcement services per year. Approximately 4,000 of those calls for services require additional investigations, documentation, written reports, referrals, and/or follow-up action. In addition to their patrol and investigation duties, our officers serve as active members on a number of interagency teams, such as like the crash team, major crimes team, emergency response team. We have adult multidisciplinary teams, child advocacy multidisciplinary teams, as well as the Southern Oregon Financial Fraud and Security teams, which is SOFAST, and that's just to name a few. So our police budget, like I said, is found on Fund 240, so that's where I'll begin. I would describe our budget as a status quo budget, as it was indicated earlier tonight. I will point out a few outliers, I guess. I'll start off in personnel services. You'll notice that the salary costs are higher than last year. There's a few contributing factors. City Manager Roger Craddock already spoke on 1 or 2 of those. We've already anticipated some closeout costs. We have 2 proposed retirements that's going to happen during this budget cycle. They're obviously tenured police officers, been with the city for many years. They will be retiring, so we had to figure in those costs. In addition, we did include the cost of living increase that's anticipated across the board. And as well as we have started to forecast for those retirements, and we are one of those departments that have began hiring in the anticipation of those future retirements. As City Manager Roger Craddock indicated, it takes us quite a bit of time to get them hired, sent off to the police academy, back trained, and out on their own. So we want to try to anticipate that to lessen the overtime cost and the backfill of shifts that would be necessary if we didn't anticipate that. So that's in the personnel services. I would say the other thing that is kind of sticks out, and Assistant City Manager Nicole Rutherford already explained it, that would have been the workman's compensation insurance, but I think she did a good job on that. So if we move into materials and services, I think if we look at the telephone, and although Councilor DeNova, I wish I could tell you that that's to replace the phone, it's really not. It's actually the increased costs of our department-issued phones, as well as the majority of that increase is due to, many of you may already know that as a county, we looked at our entire police radio system. It went to the voters. They voted in an enhanced system, and I'm actually happy to report we are on that system now live as of yesterday for Coos Bay. But with that, each one of our receiver sites needed a dedicated fiber line, and which gets us off the old copper T1 lines, and it'll be a much more stable, much more superior system, but it does come with a little more of a cost in terms of running those receivers. So that's the anticipated cost increase. As we work our way down through this, most everything else is status quo. You'll notice that the uniform allowance, we combined the new uniforms and the uniform allowance. That was just my request to make it a little bit easier. We put those two items together. It's the same amount, it's $28,000, but we just put those two together. We had to increase our petroleum. That's our fuel cost. I think that kind of goes without saying.
Is $4,000 sufficient?
You know, we looked back, that's a really good question. We did do a look back on what we had spent. We anticipated the increase. We feel that is going to be adequate. We're hoping that we see a cap on these gas prices at some point.
Circling back a little, where did Cent go?
Yeah, that was my
So, thank you thank you for bringing that up. So, we were providing them some operational costs of $25,000. Cent is kind of in flux right now. They are still operational with one detective part-time in that capacity. They've also removed a lot of their operational expenses. They moved back to the sheriff's office. So the $25,000 that we were contributing for those operational expenses, we have chosen to not at this point, and we would be able to provide them resources such as officers or investigators if need be, and we have been working with them from time to time as well. So.
I think I interrupted somebody on the petroleum products.
Yeah.
I would just state on the petroleum also, as we replace vehicles, we do get more efficient vehicles. So there is some savings that is combined through that.
If we turn the page, at least for me anyways, it's page 40. Again, most everything is status quo. I did want to highlight just a couple, the last two line items, 2444, that's the Homeward Bound program. Some of you may know that the city has actually partnered up with ORCA on a program that we call Homeward Bound, and that program is it's a pretty important program, and it's been very successful. And what the intention of that program is to help return the unhoused or unsheltered folks in our community, return them back to their family in a different location. And sometimes they find themselves here and they need to get back to, let's say, Washington, but they have no means and no ability to do that. There's a process that they have to go through. We have to verify that they're actually returning to family and they have resources available for them. But that's what those funds are. We're able to utilize those funds to help that person get back and reunite with their family member and get the needed resources that they need. So it's been very valuable. The other thing is the 2445, the last one, the nuisance abatement. As I work through this, you're going to see there was a 243 account fund, and that was actually our codes fund. And that's actually now sitting under Public Works. Mr. Hosley or his team will be presenting that portion of the budget later on tonight. But in that budget, there was a nuisance abatement fund. So what we did is we took a portion of that fund out, $10,000, and we allocated it to, in the 240, 2445, and that is for the removal of the abandoned vehicles, trailers, and unlawful vehicles and trailers. And that's the way that we can pay the tow services for and you know, the destruction and disposal of those said vehicles. So that's what that is.
Is that an appropriate amount? Seems low.
Actually, I think with our recent tow contract that we have, you know, got passed and we're working off of, I think we're going to be just fine in that area.
Chief, can you, I should know this, but the difference between the community resources officer and the community services officer, and I see that community service officer is just a part-time position. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so our community resource officer is a full-time a police officer that is actually out working with our homeless, unsheltered population, working with Coos Health and Wellness, working with the resources available, connecting those folks to those resources, and dealing a lot with the mentally ill as well. Our community service officer is a part-time non-sworn position. We implemented that position in an effort to help offset some of the patrol burdens while we're, again, rebuilding our department and hiring and training. That position is to help handle some of the cold thefts. We call them cold thefts, you know, thefts that maybe were reported the day before, no suspect information, the criminal mischiefs, graffiti, whatnot. That community service officer can go out, handle those type of cold calls with not dealing with suspects, and still provide a level of service that we feel is extremely important for the community. I will tell you, it has been an outstanding program. We've heard nothing but positive you know, feedback on that, and so we're happy to have that at this point.
Can you, do you feel like one FTE for the community resources officer is enough for the I suppose, the need or the demand in the community?
Well, I mean, you know, in terms of could we utilize another FTE?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I would never turn that down. But the reality of it is I think that we have been able to take that position and with that direct you know, effort and resource that we have, we've been able to get it to where one person is able to manage it at this time. We've also, my command staff and myself, we've been talking about taking a look at that position and also our investigative unit, and maybe come up with some a little bit more creative ways to also utilize some additional resources in areas that we see that there may be some gaps. So,
Thank you.
Chief, is there any relief that comes, I think our next door neighbors are also looking at a resource officer as well?
You are correct, and they've actually reached out to us as well, and I know that when they get that up and running, it's going to be a great partnership.
And I would just mention the person that they have being the community services officer isn't a green person. It's actually a retired police officer that has more than almost 3 decades of service.
Yeah. And there was a little method behind our madness on that. We're utilizing him as well as a training. He's helping us with some of our recruits, teaching them crime scene processing and some of the old school policing that they don't necessarily teach, like dusting fingerprints and whatnot. And so we're finding that to be a real benefit to help some of these younger officers get their
Thank you.
legs in a room. So, but I'm open for any questions on the 240, and if we don't have any, I'll move into the 242.
Chief, the 2201, that uniform allowance, that's just because of the increase in new officers?
So what we did is, if you look at are you talking 2201 and 2202? So if you look at those two accounts, all we did was we combined those two together and we created one fund. It was just getting a little, it was at my request, just to make it a little more simplified.
Got it.
One less line to keep track of.
Exactly. Any other questions?
I guess I'm curious, I mean, it's more of a process, but I'm curious if that homeward bound funding would be better appropriated to the Nancy Devereaux Center than Orca.
So I will say that we actually have a couple of different programs. The Nancy Devereaux Center actually takes care of a different set of individuals, basically people that we cannot confirm that will actually have a place to live when they get there. Orca is actually verifying that those people actually have a place to live there, and they get reimbursed the funds that they spend to relocate them. The Devereaux Center actually comes up with funding for people that want to go somewhere else, but we can't guarantee, we don't know that they actually have a place to stay when they get there. So we actually don't use funding for that, and that it's basically, it's a philosophy that we don't bus what was formerly called transients to another community, because we don't want that to happen to us.
It just doesn't look like it's being utilized right now, this fiscal 20, just over $2,000.
Yeah, it goes in spurts.
And I think some of that had a little bit to do with COVID. It was historically in the 8s and 10s, and then it's dropped down. So I'd expect it to be back up.
And can you clarify that with COVID? Because it was my understanding that, Roger, I think you told me this, that we couldn't actually move people at that time, right? Am I saying that correctly?
There wasn't as much of that, and then sometimes it goes into spurts as well, because in delay in billing.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have at hand the year-to-date for that item?
Sorry?
Do you have on hand the year-to-date for the current year?
Yes.
And while she's looking that up, I don't know what the current number, but I do know is that since we started that program, more than 50 people has been relocated.
It can also help people move if they have proof of a job. So it's not just if they have somewhere to stay, if they can, if all they need to get back on their feet is to get where the job is at, and we can verify the job, I say we, because I'm Director Orga, then that also can be done.
So there hasn't been any spent year to date, but they've just reached out in the last probably 3 or 4 weeks saying they're aware that they have some billings to catch up with us.
Keep going.
Okay. Now we'll move into the Police Communication Fund, Fund 242. This budget reflects salary and associated benefits, employment costs for 8 out of our 13 dispatch positions. The employment costs for the additional 5 dispatchers will be found in Fund 10, which I'll go over directly after Fund 242. Just a quick overview of our Communication 911 Dispatch Center. Our dispatch center is considered by the state of Oregon to be a primary answering point for 911 calls. You may have heard it referred to as a PSAP. Our center handles those 911 calls and dispatches the necessary emergency services to include police, fire, medical, within the cities of Coos Bay, Coquille Tribal, some Confederated Tribal, some SWAC, and most recently, the city of North Bend Police and Fire. In January of this year, the city of North Bend began contracting their dispatch and 911 services through Coos Bay's 911 Center. I will explain this a little bit further and more in depth when we get to Fund 10. Each year, our dispatch center processes over 72,000 calls for public safety services and handles over 13,000 911 calls. On an average, the center is receiving over 5,000 calls for service per month. So with that, we'll get started in the 242.
Chief, I'm sorry, was that 13,000, is that a year or?
So 13,000 911
Okay,
calls.
thank you.
72,000 calls for service.
Okay, thank you.
The 242, I guess the main thing that I'll point out, and I mentioned it in my little intro, this is for 8 FTEs. If you remember, we have 13, so the other 5 will come out of Fund 10. I'll explain that in a little bit. But I'm really presenting you a status quo budget with no real significant changes at all. One thing I would like to point out, on 2410, it says the chaplaincy and volunteer program. We have not gotten rid of that program. If you look back on the 240 account, we just moved it over to the 240 account, the one I just presented to you. So it's still there.
Chief, can you give us some explanation as to why line 2303, last year it was 46K and you've got projected 1,500 in the new budget?
Yeah, so that was in anticipation of our console costs. I don't know if you remember or not, we did a new console upgrade in our dispatch center, and that was some of the anticipated costs with that upgrade. Some of that project also came out of our major capital, but that was some additional anticipated cost associated to that.
So because we've done that, we don't need to use, we don't have that, I can't talk now, it's almost 8.
We don't have that expense rolling forward.
Okay.
Yes,
Great,
you're correct.
thank you.
Yeah.
What percent of the total cost is covered by the contractual agreements with other?
So that'll come out of the Fund 10. I don't know if I have a breakdown of actual percentage. When we get into Fund 10, I can walk us through how that is broke down and what contributes or what comes from the contracts, what comes from the 911 revenue, and how that's broke down. Any questions on 242? All right, well, we'll just jump into Fund 10. So I think for you guys, it may be on page 85. And I'll let you get there real quick before I start. Okay. So if you look at the resources from other agencies, the top 3 numbers, 150, 30,000, 90,000, those are the 911 revenue dollars that come from City of Coos Bay, City of Coquille, and the City of North Bend. The 911 contracts is the contracts between the cities that we provide dispatch services. That's the dispatch service contract. So between the 911 revenue and the dispatch service contracts, that is where and the balance carryover, that's where we get that 730 to 250. Out of that, if we look into the personnel services, that covers 5 of our FTEs. And that's something I wanted to point out. You'll notice that there's a significant increase from the previous year. Previously, that Fund 10 funded 2 of our 911 dispatchers, and now it'll fund 5, a total of 5. So there's obviously an increase in salaries. And then what we did was we started to break out more consistent to what you saw in 242, Fund 242, under the materials and services. We put a line item in for meetings, training, telephone, contractual, uniform allowances. Some of those were zeroed last year because we didn't have them. We were pulling them all out of the 242, and we're trying to get this account to be a little more consistent with the 242.
So and I think maybe, Councilor Stevens, what might be answering your question is that the total cost, the additional cost for those 3 new employees to undertake services for the city of North Bend is covered in full by the city of North Bend, in addition to covering administrative and supervision costs. So we do charge more than the actual cost for those employment-related costs. And in reality, it really helps our citizens. With the additional dispatchers, we have greater capacity when a major event happens. There's generally more staff in the center, and rarely do emergencies in both cities happen at the exact same time. So that just helps us in providing better services, not only to North Bend, but to Coos Bay and Coquille as well. And I would say that we also provide services to the Klutzi tribe. We have a fee-for-services agreement to provide police and fire services to them. This is a model that we've used not only in the police department, it is a long-standing model that we use within the fire department, where we provide contractual services to a few fire districts, but that helps us cover our costs and gives us greater capacity to have our personnel.
Sorry.
I noticed that you provide 911 services for SWAC, but I didn't see a line item in here for their contribution.
Actually, it's a very small line item, and actually we provide radio services.
Yeah, so SWAC is already within our 911 jurisdiction. So if we received a 911 call, it would already come into the Coos Bay Center, theoretically, if everything is routed correctly on the phone that they call in. So we provide dispatch services, radio services for their security officers. For instance, today, they called and needed an officer to respond out there. They call into our dispatch center. We dispatch the appropriate police or law enforcement services or fire services if needed.
I can't remember how that contract lays out, but PERS, we're covered as well with the additional employees from North Bend, because North Bend pays all of that, correct?
It covers the entire cost of that employee, and it also puts provision for increased employment costs moving forward from year to year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on Fund 10? All right, thank you, guys.
We're almost at 2 hours. Does anybody want a 5-minute break?
I'm going to say it, I do.
Okay. Somebody caved. Let's take a 5-minute. We'll come back in at 8 o'clock. Keep her rolling.
Really? Gotta really be. My spot there.
You making it? Oh, yeah. Not time for a nap yet. No. That's interesting. Yeah, well, that's good. Sorry, guys. parents end up with all kinds of crap, right?
Which I should have done.
I found this, I still have it in my pocket. I still feel like, where is it? No, they just made us be real careful. Well, I used a chair on the edge, actually, they put in there because my chair kept tipping off the side and I would yell, ocean.
We were in here, just looking at the sound.
Yeah.
And then supervision was going down back and I said, but the admin is, yeah, plus money. Testing the mics. And she got to her chair. I said, yeah, no, I have fallen, I have turned all the lights out here and I'm like, back and shut that, and I've fallen off that stair. I said, she goes, well, they kind of, I don't think just put that thing up against the edge so you can drive this thing off the edge. Because you know that's what I would do.
Oh, I do it. That's why I don't hold all the way in before the meeting starts and we've done the pledge, because I never get stuck. Yeah. I'm doing this meeting over here trying to get it.
I think Franklin's in there.
We just gotta turn the lights back on. Good. There we go. Wake everybody back up. So you ready for your time? Spotlight? I had to turn the lights on. So you start facing back. Everybody wants to see the truck.
And here I am, walking the way, so well, you're in now. It's not like there's not other
Well, it's still dredging is one.
pretty close. How's that kid doing?
This was kind of my bad. Yeah, which side I was thinking.
That would be hard.
It takes like 12 minutes.
I live right downtown, but I was just yeah, but I walked downtown, and I walked down my really weird about drug touching my daughter. The map.
Yeah, I think they wake up.
My husband thinks I'm a lawyer, he's got his homework, and like, well, the map says that we go this way.
I took a road up there trying to get from Maria to where they were going after we were there. And I went down a road going there, it's about 2 miles of RVs and tents. And there was the H-frame pickup, like the just sheer metal, shiny metal frame, nothing else to it. It looked like it was off the factory.
They saw it kind of were off of their vehicles. They got there, moved their stuff into their apartment. $1,200. It's just like,
Okay.
at least, she has family. Just like it's
Like I said.
that was just perfect.
Well, you know, when I went up there, I was.
About time.
So I asked, I think it's one restoration, are free.
Yeah, they didn't give me a gavel, so I just flicked the mic.
Yeah, I couldn't.
That's what I'm saying.
Welcome to my world. It's like,
At least it goes back for the chair. I took it.
yeah, there's one, Mr. Goes, that one's narrower than yours. This one, there's that narrower.
It's like a little pause.
All righty, I turned the lights back on just so Mark could give his presentation. You're welcome.
I know, poor Mark.
Well, good evening, Mayor, City Council, and Budget Committee members. The budget document provides a description of the fire department and the services that we provide. I have some observations and updates that I'd like to share with you before we look at the budget proposal. So the fire department is made up of 16 career members, supplemented by 8 student firefighters and 12 volunteers. Staffing levels have remained the same since 2002, or for the last 20 years, when the department went from 22 full-time employees down to 16. In 2002, the fire department responded to 1,803 emergencies, and in contrast, this last year, the department responded to 4,248, a prime example of doing more with less. So that's I didn't do the math, that's about, 2,400 difference.
What were the numbers?
What's that?
I said, what were the numbers?
You weren't paying attention?
No.
There's a test later.
I was playing with my papers.
So 20 years ago, we responded to 1,803, and this last year we responded to 4,248. So, significant increase.
Quite a bit.
With the approval of the city manager, we've recently made a significant change to our organizational chart. Roughly a year ago, the Public Works and Community Development Department hired Amy Linder to be the building code administrator. Amy's background is in fire prevention, and she had been the assistant fire marshal for the city of Eugene before coming to Coos Bay. With Jim Hosley's permission, I asked if we could use her training, certifications, and experience to improve our fire prevention programs. This dual role instantly improves the continuity between the permit process, the building inspection process. It brings unquestionable credibility to the fire code enforcement and provides seamless access for the public, for contractors or developers with fire code questions. By adding this fire marshal duties to Amy's workload, the fire department has accepted the responsibility for 25% of her salary and benefits. So that should explain some of the things within the material, or within the personnel services budget. Yes.
So having a fire marshal on staff now, is that going to increase your fire inspections?
Yes, with some caveats. So Essentially, what she will be doing is doing plan review. That's what she's certified to do, doing some fire code inspections. We'll still be doing company inspections with the fire department and with the operational staff on a limited basis. COVID kind of slowed things down considerably. We hope to get back into businesses to make sure that things are safe and doing business inspections, but under her guidance. And if there is a question or clarification, then she has the expertise to be able to help us with that. Or also, if there's violations, then she can either do the follow-up or have one of her other inspectors do the follow-up.
I would just share that this actually fills a vacancy currently that was being provided by the state through the deputy fire marshal, and that position's been vacant for a couple of years, and there's no anticipation of when that might be filled.
That's correct. With that, let's take a look at the budget, and I'll let you tell me what line items, if any, you would like to discuss further.
Line item 2207 went from 117K to 20K.
Yeah. So the difference there is about $95,000, and that reflects a grant that we received for container supply or for emergency shelter supplies. So
Okay.
special department supplies includes emergency management.
Okay, thank you.
Others?
I'll ask you the same question that I asked the police chief about fuel costs.
Yeah, and I'll give roughly the same answer. We don't really know what fuel costs are going to do. We've looked at this very carefully, and we're confident that it's going to be adequate. Nobody really knows for sure, but we have done ample research and projecting as best we can. So we feel it's a prudent request.
I just want to point it out because the public may not realize it as much, but the fire department makes a lot of medical responses, correct? Because you see medical supplies in here.
Medical supplies actually doesn't cost that much in comparison. 66% of our emergencies are medical related. And so, yes, there is a large portion. We have 9 paramedics on staff. Our fire trucks are equipped with everything that an ambulance has, with the exception of the gurney. We just don't transport, and that's provided through a private ambulance company. So yes, we do a significant amount of emergency medical response, but most of that is either restocked from the ambulance company. So if we use IVs or drugs, then that's restocked by the ambulance company.
Mark, this is Joe. So I saw that Mel came down that we were not going to assist in assisted living facility anymore with fall. How's that impacted us?
That's a good question. So yes, starting January 1st, we have changed our response practices to assisted living facilities, basically where they have staff there. We still go there for emergencies, medical emergencies, or fire, but not for lift assists. So if someone falls and need assistance getting up, their staff were being told, we'll call 911 and have the fire department come out and pick them up and put them back in their chair, what have you. That was becoming quite a drain on our resources. Putting that responsibility back on them or to Bay City's ambulance, who can then bill for their services. We can't bill for our services for response for non-emergency responses to medical facilities. So we advised them that we were going to change our practices. That has had a difference. We've noticed a marked reduction in our responses. We still go to the assisted living facilities, but not nearly as regularly. But it's usually just either when it's a true emergency, or if Bay City's ambulance is delayed, then we will still go. Across the board, there's an increase with consideration for inflation. Another big one I'd kind of like to draw your attention to is automotive parts, 2308. That goes up significantly. Essentially, we can't predict accurately what's going to break and when, but historically, we see that every year there's something happens. So 2 years ago, we had to replace the whole engine within a truck that was, well, it's a 2016, so it has a brand-new engine in it. This last year, the 2019, or the 2009, sorry, I'm getting my years mixed up a little bit. 2006, we replaced the entire engine. The 2009 fire engine had a turbo go bad, and so that was about another $12,000. So it seems like every year there's a significant breakdown. Our fleet is, the average age is about 16 years old. We have one fire truck that's 26 years old, another ladder truck is 25 years old, and the older they get, the more expensive the repairs. And when we're using them as much as we are, and as old as they are, we can anticipate that significant expenses will be had. So that's why we've asked for additional funding in that area.
Do you have a replacement fund for the fire engines then?
Yes, we do. It's essentially a savings account, and I'll be coming to that
Okay.
next. So when we're done with this, then we'll go directly into that.
Perfect transition.
Okay.
2311, I noticed that seems to have a great deal of variance from year to year.
Fire grants? Yeah, it just depends on if we're successful getting a grant or not. We typically start with $40,000 in there as a holding number. If we're successful at securing grants, which we've been very fortunate with over the last several years, then we increase that line item number, generally through a supplemental grant or supplemental budget.
Chief, just a question back to the parts. You guys have great relationships with the departments and the agencies that provide for emergency services. I noticed that North Bend did some rapid response vehicles to reduce the wear and tear on their vehicles. Is that something, we've considered that in the past. Is it worth looking at again?
It's something we always look at. We're always looking at different options or strategies. North Bend has a different way of doing things in some ways. We are very in step on most things. Years ago, so late 90s, mid 90s, we did have a rapid response type of model. And when we reduced our staffing numbers, we found that was not going to be sustainable. If we take a smaller vehicle to an emergency and leave the big truck behind, then we can be stuck basically unprepared. And so we've gone away from that model. Other questions? Okay, I'll go directly into, if you follow me to page 104. So several years ago, we started a savings account to absorb some of the financial impact when we purchase a new fire truck. So the city's been transferring 10% of the revenue that we generate from our contracts with some neighboring jurisdictions, Libby, Bunker Hill, and Timber Park fire districts, which equates to about $25,000 a year, goes into this equipment reserve fund or savings account, similar to what we would do with our own budgets at home. Bottom line is fire service equipment is very expensive. In 2019, so just 3 years ago, the city bought a fire engine for $513,000. That same truck, if we were to buy it today, would be $675,000. And costs are not going back, they're not going down, they're just continuing to climb. So in order to have a meaningful percentage to add to the next fire department purchase or fire truck purchase, and to keep up with the rapidly growing pricing, we're proposing that a $100,000 bolus be put from the capital improvement fund and another, and then ARPA funds, which, I don't remember the acronym, American Rescue Plan, thank you. ARPA funding coupled with that $25,000 from the contract districts for an additional $100,000 from the general fund to equal $200,000 transfer into the savings account this year. And then that will, again, doesn't get us all the way there, but when it does come time to purchase a fire truck, then at least we have some supplemental money there that doesn't take quite so much of a hit on either the timber sales or the general fund.
In the timber sales, can you remind us about the timber sales and the fire truck?
Certainly not my expertise, but I'll try. So every other year, the city sells the timber. We own some timberland in the watershed, and my understanding is that...
Let me help you.
Yes, please.
So between the water board and the city of Coos Bay, there's approximately 1,600 acres of timberland. We own about half of that, and we have a sustainable harvest plan whereby we take turns every other year on a perfect plan of harvesting approximately 40 acres of timber. So we do have a timber harvest that's coming up this year, and we anticipate receiving just over $500,000 in timber revenue, although it's not pure profit because we'll be spending up to $200,000 in timber harvest-related costs.
And then those monies go towards the purchase of a new fire truck, correct?
That is correct. We actually use those funds and dedicate those funds towards the purchase of capital equipment.
Capital equipment, yeah.
So not just fire trucks, but
I was trying for
other
you,
capital
my friend.
expenditures are needed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We do share, though. Other questions? Okay. That's all I have then. Thank you.
And thank you. Next, we have Public Works and Community Development.
Hey, thank you. Good evening. The Public Works and Community Development Department has just over 40.
Page 49.
So that's page 47 is the org chart. 48 gets us started.
Oh, I'm sorry, 48. No, 49.
We have several functions that we are involved with, including building codes administration, codes enforcement, planning and zoning, city engineering, geographic information systems. We also do street maintenance, parks maintenance, and water quality. So starting on 48 and 49, we get into the planning and zoning. Planning staff reviews submitted plans and applications for compliance with the requirements of the municipal code and state law. The staff reviews the comprehensive plan and implementing ordinances to ensure they are prepared to meet the ordinances that meet growth management issues and reflect the city council's policy directions. So looking at page 49, we get started on the budget numbers. As we discussed earlier, the salary increases there based on reallocation of personnel time. And then we have line item 2108, contractual, that's $130,000. It's about $100,000 less than last year. And we use that line item to budget for contractual services, specialty services, either paid for by developers and reimbursed, or used for city projects.
Jim, is the reason that's down, I might have this wrong, is the reason that's down because we're managing our own wastewater treatment plant now and we had monies last year in that line item?
Well, no, this is because we have projects or anything.
Just project-based? Okay, thank you.
Any more questions on the zoning? Jennifer and I will be tag teaming on the various public works budget.
Well, hello, everyone. We'll just roll right into the next couple pages, pages 50 and 51. This budget has to do with the engineering division. In the engineering division, we work on both public and private projects. The public projects consist of sewer and storm and upgrades to our treatment plants. We also provide engineering support to our new water quality division. On the private side, as Roger indicated, there's just a significant increase in private development. So we review land use applications, provide support from an engineering standpoint to the planning division, and as well as review all permit applications. So with that said, I'll just go right into the budget. There is not a lot of changes here. We're just really working on optimizing. So if you have any questions, you can fill those now.
Salaries?
Salaries.
That is just a staff allocation change where engineering might have been more involved with a number of urban renewal projects. Those projects maybe are at their tail end or completing, and this just is more based on their activity time.
So, sorry, Roger, just sorry, I've got this. So it's gone up. Is that because, I'm going to go back to wastewater, is that because more staff time is being spent in this budget?
Yeah, while we still have, in essence, the same number of people, more of their time is being spent on non-urban renewal related projects.
Okay, thank you. I had to say it twice. I got it the second time.
Training seems to move around quite a bit.
It really depends on the tenure of the staff and if there's some specific knowledge. And there's always going to be ongoing continuing education, and those needs can fluctuate.
But as someone said earlier, with what COVID's taught us, we can do a lot of this virtually, so that goes down.
Yeah. All righty, thoughts, questions, concerns? All right, we can keep moving then.
Okay.
We're on to parks.
Page 53 starts the numbers for the Parks Division. That takes care of our park system, including our swimming pool and maintenance of facilities, as an example of some of their duties. So looking on page 53, you see again an increase in the salaries, again some reallocation.
And this might be a good opportunity to share that the city's always looking for public-private partnerships so that we can run more efficiently. And one of those examples is the pool. While the city owns the pool and does some maintenance, we do not operate the pool. We contract with a nonprofit who actually manages and staffs the pool. If it were not that case, I'm not sure we would be able to operate the pool due to the cost of public employees.
Can you remind me of the, excuse me, line item 2307, concrete, asphalt, and gravel? Can you give me some background on that again?
What we use those dollars for is for maintenance of trails within the parks.
Okay. And can you also remind me about the boat ramps? Did we get funding to fix the Empire boat ramp? And so that will be done this year? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
There will be an excellent article coming out probably about 6:30 in the morning on the Friday update on that very topic.
And will we get it done before fishing season or salmon season?
No.
Okay. You didn't make all my dreams come true then, Roger, so.
I see line item 2309, building grounds maintenance has gone down 5,000. Is that wise?
It's based on our what we're spending. What the outlook is that we're not going to spend a total $85,000 this year. So it's just a readjustment.
And that provides a jumping off point to another important practice that the city You often hear in government that if I don't spend what's budgeted, they'll give me less next year, and that's not a practice that we use. We only spend what is necessary and try not to spend everything we have. So we don't subscribe to that practice. If we don't have to spend it, we don't, because there really is just a limited pot of dollars. And anything we don't spend this year can go up to the next year.
So 2112, that line item there, that's gone up a little bit. And those are the temporary folks that we hire to do parks maintenance. So a lot of the park maintenance. So we see an increase there because we definitely probably going to exceed our budgeted dollar amount for this fiscal year.
Thank you. That was my next question, is that enough budget in there? Because I know that you've been doing a lot of cleanup work, and so that should be sufficient.
Roger, there's been lots of conversations about trash receptacles. So would that be under capital outlay? I know we were talking about getting different ones this next year. Where would we find that?
Actually, the bulk of that's going to be in urban renewal under streetscape and
Okay.
street furniture.
Okay, thank you.
Line 2414, Mingus School operation, it looks like we've actually already spent more than what we anticipated for actual 2021, 88,000 versus the 73,000 that we have budgeted.
I know we had an unexpected issue come up, and I'm sorry I can't, it was a boiler.
A couple of years ago, we undertook a number of improvements to the pool. And this last year, we actually resurfaced the pool. But when we took those major improvements to the boilers, the heaters, and the filtration system, we actually cut our costs. It actually became more efficient, but every once in a while, we get a unexpected surprise.
Yep.
And I was just going to mention that because we now operate water quality division, we also partner with them and get some benefits on chemicals costs.
On the call here, Sugar Creek, we used it quite a bit. So how are we offsetting that cost and how are we filling that void?
With Shutter Creek, is that what you said, Mr. Mayor?
Yes. For beautification,
We're
or?
just using that.
Well, no, we've been using it for maintenance, clean up the parks, litter, and various ways, I believe, throughout the city.
So, right. So now we're using more temporary workers through Cardinal Services primarily.
And your other benefit by providing revenue sharing with AYA, you're getting some litter pickup.
So if we're seeing an increase in cost because we're using Cardinal Services for litter patrol and stuff, seems like we should want a bigger number than 110 on line item 2112, considering we are spending more than we budgeted.
Is that one we want to redline?
Is that the increase in contractual?
No, the contractual, that's primarily for portable toilets,
Oh.
where bulk of those dollars go.
Are we continuing to use those portable toilets? Because it looks like we still don't have enough there either.
Yeah, so the temporaries come out of litter patrol and beautification.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, 2112, and we're already over budget for what we adopted by 35,000, and then we only added 5,000 to the last year's budget.
That's not actual from this year.
No, that's, yeah.
The actual from this year so far is about 105.
Oh, okay.
So right at what we budgeted.
And actuals might have been because, related to, and I'm gonna take a guess here, that we had some major transient camps that we cleaned up, and it was extremely expensive.
Yeah, well, we still got more, so I'm wondering, should we bump that line item up?
Yeah, I don't know that we have more than we used to have.
No, but
We're
there's,
actually maintaining. But you certainly could redline that and make that a discussion.
I feel like at least in John Toppett's Park, potentially seeing some increased beautification over there due to the fact that we're spending a bunch of money for the new library there would be beneficial, but I'd like to redline it if anybody else is with me.
It only takes one person to do a red line.
It's our line.
Cool. We've got it tagged. We'll come back to it at the end. And we also see codes enforcement coming next. That was moved out of public safety, you'll recall. So that's why that suddenly exists. And that would take us to street maintenance.
Okay, street maintenance. The city street department maintains the streets and right-of-way system of the city. We have 130 lane miles of asphalt road, 14 lane miles of concrete road, and 23 lane miles of gravel road, including alleys, and then the 11 parking lots that we maintain. There are several sources of funding for our streets in the city. First, we'll be talking about state gasoline tax, but I'll go over the others that we have as well. Besides the gasoline tax, which is the
What page are you on? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, page 56 and 57.
Okay, thank you.
So we also have the Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds, which used to be called Surface Transportation Program, or STP. And these are federal dollars that are run through the states, and there's a formula at the state level that they use to allocate funding towards us. We typically get around 200,000, 220,000 a year. And recently, restrictions on the use of those dollars were relaxed, so we could spend these surface transportation block grant funds just like we do state gasoline tax dollars. We talked earlier about the franchise fee. That's a 2% fee on electric utility. That generates about $313,000 a year for us. There's earlier discussion on the Downtown Urban Renewal District Special Levy. Those are dollars that go to capital improvements in the downtown district. And then we have same in Empire. It's not the special levy, but special funding specifically for streets. Roger talked about the jurisdictional exchange fund, and there'll be some more discussion of that. And then council approved a transportation utility fee, which generates just under $1 million, about $975,000 a year that we use for doing reconstruction of streets. And with that, I can move on to page 58, which shows the various revenues. You see there, we're looking at state gas tax of $1.175 million.
Those numbers are pretty flat other than the federal grant there.
Right, a federal grant, which probably is why our carryover is a little higher.
Yeah.
Jim, I know we have a needs assessment or a rating of our streets, and I don't know if we know the answer yet, but how many potholes are we going to fix in this next?
I don't have a number right now. I know Greg is working on that.
Okay.
They have a running number. You know, we were carrying 800 to 600. I think we've reduced that down significantly.
Great, thank you.
I think what's really important is the number of different revenue sources are primarily due to concerted effort by the council in the past to make sure that we were actually doing more with our streets. It wasn't that many years ago when we had less than $100,000 in funding for a capital project in a street. And now you'll see through the combined number of funds there will be in excess of $6 million in street maintenance. $3 million from the city's fund, but there's almost an additional amount from that. 2015, 2016, we did an assessment, and even at that time, in those dollars, we needed $17 million in street improvements. And that was just a point in time. Costs are higher, and since that time, other parts of our street system have only gone down. So I think it's good stewardship on behalf of the council and the budget committee as we continue to reinvest in the infrastructure that we have.
Thank you.
On the jurisdictional exchange fund, how much does that 4.8 million generate each year?
It depends on the amount of interest. Currently, as we'll get to that fund, I think we're going to be transferring $330,000 to the street maintenance fund out of there. But I'm going to guess it's maybe $150,000 in a year, and it's because of the low interest rates right now.
We've only earned 20,000 this year, but there have been years where it's been at 100,000 and above.
Any further questions on this bit?
Page 59 shows the expenditure side. If you look at 2125 streetlights, council implemented a LED replacement project for all the city streetlights, and that's resulting in significant savings in power costs.
Jim, I have a question on that actually, because I noticed that, I don't know what the exact savings is here, 45,000, but somewhere further on in this budget, we're going to see the debt service on those lights is significantly more than that. And I thought the savings was going to pay for the debt service.
So I do believe they will. We don't have a full year cycle yet to know what our actual costs are going to be. So we always budget our resources conservatively, but we always budget our expenses a little bit more to make sure we have an adequate room to fulfill our debts. I think as that program carries out and then all the new rates go in, that we'll actually see a much bigger savings.
What's the length on that debt service? Length of time?
I think
it's 10 years.
10, that's what I think.
And then this first payment is from, it's not a first like 1 year cycle, it's actually like a 14-month cycle from initiation of project to that first payment. So it is a little bit higher than it will be in regular years.
Okay.
Excellent question.
Line 2303 went up from 12,000 to 35,000 this past year. This present year, we've already expended over $32,000 in equipment repairs. Again, we never know what's going to happen, but we do have some aging equipment and thus those expenses. We have some extra dollars in the concrete, asphalt, and gravel this year proposed, and with those we can do more potholes, and we also use these dollars for our gravel streets, striping the streets, signage.
Jim, just a question on the repairs. Are the repairs that were made significant enough that we'll see longer life out of those vehicles that were repaired?
Okay. We have some major parts that needed to be repaired on couple of our pieces of heavy equipment.
Okay.
So it'll give us some more years of life.
And we should anticipate that we'll see some efficiencies as we go through and start replacing some of our our smaller vehicles through the enterprise rental program.
See, streetscape maintenance went up significantly, 2310.
Yeah, that's to put more effort into our streetscapes.
I like it.
And in that case, because it is difficult to get casual employees, we're actually looking at a change in practice and contracting some of that work out to landscaping firms.
I think that's a good idea.
So will that take care of some of the issues we have with grass growing along? I mean, what do you mean by streetscapes? Because that's the complaint I get usually in the spring.
You were right. More efforts on controlling weeds and maybe enhancing what we have. There's also page 60, continues for materials and services.
All righty. Input on page 60?
Nope.
Sounds quiet.
Okay, we're moving on to page 61 and 62, talking about our water quality division. Not including myself and Jim or the engineering division, we have 17 full-time employees in the water quality division. This is our first year of taking back operations and maintenance, O&M in-house. It's been a good year. The plants are looking great. We have met permits 6 months in a row, and some of you guys know that it's been a while since I've been able to say that. We worked really hard with really good crew. So we're real proud of that. So going into page 63, we'll start talking about the resources. So going down, I'd like to point out for the sewer use fees, and maybe I'll just back up for a minute. It was mentioned earlier, but this is an enterprise fund, so it's fully funded by, it's a user-paid system. So to that point, going down to 1,400 sewer use fees, we are proposing an increase of 5.5%.
Yeah, maybe I'll just take a little bit of time here. This reflects a philosophy on how to manage the cost of the utility. As our city engineer, or actually a dual role deputy director and city engineer, she could share with you that some parts of our system are nearly 100 years old. The bones of Plant 1, which is behind Motel 6, that dates back to the 50s. And every 20 or so years, we have to replace or upgrade our systems. It was just a few years ago that we replaced Plant 2 in total, brand new plant, just under $24 million. We'll be spending far more than that over the course of the next 20 years for Plant 1 as we upgrade that. The system also has 26 pump stations and possibly in the future 27. And we have to replace one of those almost every year and sometimes 2 a year, and somewhere around the neighborhood of $1 million or more. So there's a heavy investment. One philosophy in financing a wastewater utility is on a pay-as-you-go. You raise your rates. If you have a $24 million project, you raise your rates to cover your costs of that plant. The other way to do it is manage it through debt. And the council was looking at maybe 14 years ago, $80 million in mandated upgrades to the system from DEQ. They looked at that, got a rate study consultant involved, and basically forecasted out when those projects would happen, and then would manage their debt through incremental rate increases. It was projected at that time those rate increases over the course of more than 20 years would be about 6.5% a year. That sounds like a lot, but I recall the days when the council had to have 2 double-digit rate increases, one 20% and the next year 25%, to manage increased costs. This helps us stabilize off these rates, and it's made it more manageable. Now, I said it was 6.5%, but the last couple of years and this year it's actually been 1% less, and that's because of the performance of our crew and managing our debt service.
Wow, good job.
What would just out of curiosity, what would that rate increase translate to in dollars for a regular user?
I think we have that. It's probably going to be $3 or $4.
Yeah. A month.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on usage. And we're talking $3 or $4, that's probably going to be your average users.
That's great.
Much less than buying a package of toilet paper.
Okay, are there any other questions on page 63 regarding resources? Hearing none.
No. Takes us into expenditures, admin, page 64.
Page 64. So this, we have 5 funds that we're going to go over here. As I said, this is the first year that we have done this in-house in 26 years. So you're going to see some optimizing. So there's going to be several changes where it's different than the previous year. So we can go over those. But the main reason is just the optimizing. So going down into materials and service, and I'll point you towards the insurance, 2120. Because we are doing this in-house, we have an increased cost of insurance. So that's why you see an increase there. And that's to cover the insurance as well as a deductible.
Correct.
Okay. Then moving on down, starting with petroleum products at 2228, you're going to see some zeros. This is an administration fund here, and we just don't use these line items for the administration fund. So we're going to move on. The next fund is a new fund, and that's the enterprise fleet lease payments. And then the last fund, which is the wastewater environmental insurance reserve, 2,600, that's been removed because now we're insuring. And actually, that bulk of that is about a little under $500,000 has been moved to capital improvement projects, so it's more projects we could do.
Yeah, it just, a number of years ago, we learned that we were not covered by city-county insurance if we had environmental spill, because we were not operating our plant, we were contracting that out. So we had to self-insure that, and what the council did was to put money aside every year and to be a self-insurance fund. Well, now that we run our plant, we don't have to have that self-insurance fund, so that all that money that's been saved now can go and undertake a project.
Any questions on 350?
Hearing none, page 65.
So you can see here that we have a lot of debt service. We manage our significant projects through this, and those are the larger projects. Any questions?
Quiet room, page 66.
Okay, fine. Okay, so just a couple things here. If you go down to 2101 utilities, you'll see that we increased that cost. So we're bringing in more telemetry, and it's just to provide more alarms, so we can be more alerted to process upsets and prevent permit violations.
Remind me what telemetry is.
I know, it's
Sorry.
communications.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
But with that comes increased utility costs.
Okay.
You know,
Stop
one
using
thing-
fancy words, Jennifer. Mhm.
One thing we'll point out under personnel, when we were doing this budget last year, we hadn't yet hired those new employees, and it was tough to figure out what level of insurance those families, if it was a single person, a person with a spouse, or a person with a or a single person, what insurance level they had. So we had to budget at worst case scenario. Now we're actually looking at actuals.
Cool.
So if you look at the actual 2020 and 2021 column, you're going to see a lot of zeros in materials and services, because the bulk of it was just the OMI contract. And OMI was the contract operator we had to manage our wastewater system. And so now you see that it's a zero because it's officially in-house.
So can you talk a little bit more about 2229 boiler fuel?
Sure thing. Oh boy. Okay. So before we lumped any petroleum into the one right above it, 2228.
Okay.
And that included any fuel for our plant-owned vehicles, our generators, and our digesters. I don't know how detailed you guys want me to get, but the digesters is what treats the byproduct sludge. And what we're trying to do is we're finding out we want to heat our digesters with methane. That's the more natural way. But we are trying to optimize those digesters. They really never ran off methane until we took over. They were just ran with petroleum. But that optimizing is taking a little time, so we really want to track that fuel we give to our digesters, and we want to show a decrease each year.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's see.
Heavy equipment went up.
Yes, so to explain this, I'm going to have you go to page 67 real quick.
Can I ask a question, please? On your boilers, are those dual fuel then? You're using methane and you can also use another fuel source for them?
Yes.
Okay,
diesel.
great.
So to explain, I'm sorry, I don't know who asked the question.
Me.
If you look at 2317, equipment parts and maintenance, last year we budgeted $75,000. You'll notice this year it was zero. And now we'll go back to page 66. There was just too many categories that really kind of overlapped, and there was no rhyme or reason, so this is more of those optimizing your seeds, so we're just distributing those costs there.
Gotcha.
So before I turn to page 66, any questions?
On to 67.
Okay. So we have a capital outlay section here, and this is just for major projects that we're doing, like the upgrading to the digesters and any vehicle purchases.
So what do you mean by vehicle purchases? Because I thought we went to a lease program.
So right now, those are only for like smaller vehicles, like pickup trucks. They don't go towards like back-on purchases or.
Do we still run the sewage truck between the two plants?
No, we don't. We
Ah.
have, yeah, we have a force main now that pumps all the waste over plant one and distributes the digesters at plant one.
Yep, mitigated a hazard. That's cool.
This looks good.
Cool. Plant 2 then? Page 68 on the document.
Okay, so plant two, you'll notice there was a decrease in the personnel services for the reason Roger cited. Going down, OMI contract, zero. And then the same thing with the heavy equipment and the equipment part maintenance, we're just consolidating those.
Overall, it's actually a lower budget than what we budgeted for this current year.
So that was going to be my question. So the actual expenses have turned out to be less than what we estimated when we took it over?
That's pretty cool.
It's always good to give good news.
Yeah. That's real satisfying.
So we're doing it efficient and cleaner.
Good job.
So plan two is page 68 and 69. Any questions?
Cool. Collections and sanitary.
Okay. Same comment on personal services there. Going down here, we just optimized a bit the permit license and fees. There's not that many on the collections side, so we reduced those significantly. You're going to see increased costs in the telephone, and that again goes back to our pump stations and decreasing the communication between our pump stations and our treatment plant.
This one's a wise expenditure of funds. As we automate those pump stations, they can actually communicate, and when there's issues, it can notify us, so we're not having to send people there as often.
Yep. We also reduce potential sanitary sewer overflows and pump station failures.
Was that the SCADA system?
SCADA Lite, we're not there yet, but we're working on it.
Okay.
Going down into materials and services, a little bit more, my contract 0, you're gonna hear me say that every single time. And then
I like it.
optimizing the petroleum products, we were able to reduce that budget, and then the same issue with consolidating some of these funds for the equipment, parts and heavy equipment purchases.
Bottom line, this budget's $200,000, a little more than $200,000 lower than the current budget year.
So collections is page 70 and 71. Any questions?
Hearing none, 72.
Okay, this is storm. You're seeing the same thing for personnel services as you saw in the other 3 budgets. Utilities, we're just optimizing, so we're ratcheting those down. My contract 0. Uniform allowance was up on this one, and this is where we're optimizing and trying to figure out what percentage should be charged to plant 1, plant 2, collection sewer, and collection storm, so this is more of a proportionate share. Petroleum products, that went up as well for the same reason, and then we're just consolidating funds. So collections, storm is on page 72 and 73.
Because I find it amusing, are we still finding cedar culverts?
Not finding, we know where they are.
Oh, okay. Any questions on these?
All the plants were down, all the costs were down.
Yes.
Even with your 4%, your PERS and your personnel add-on. Excellent.
So that means more money is being invested into the infrastructure.
Because later on, it will get dirty. It will get bad.
Alrighty, that takes us to hotel motel tax fund.
I will take that one. That's a separate fund because, you want to go to 29? Well, sure, go right ahead.
That's on the schedule.
Did I
Yes,
skip
you're
something?
right, it is on the schedule. We are going to move from the water quality to the water quality improvement, and this goes to the projects, and I believe that's page 104.
104, yeah, 104.
That's right.
Why even have a schedule if I'm not going to follow it?
So 104 is the resources. If there are no questions, I'm gonna go over to 105 and talk a little bit about our system.
Cool.
So Roger touched on it. We've got 2 treatment plants, we've got 50 miles of storm, 3 pump stations per storm, 23 pump stations per sewer, 90 miles of sewer pipe. Over half of that system really is greater than 50 years old, and a large portion of that is pushing 100 years. And that's mostly the sanitary sewers collection system, but it's an old aging system, and it needs constant upkeep. And that's where Fund 29 comes into place. So what we do is in engineering, we manage a 3-year rolling capital improvement project list. And so we try to push out our projects and plan them as best as possible, understanding that there's unplanned projects and emergencies that come up. And then we put them into these groups here you see at the top, starting at 3001. Stormwater, well, that's plant 1, plant 2, the collection system. And then 2 down is the emergency/unplanned projects. Take any questions that you may have.
3025, what ended up being the actual cost for the Inglewood School cleanup?
$1 million, if you want to know the exact amount, but I have it, but it is $1 million.
So how do we have money left over?
I'm sorry?
It looks like you have $250,000 left over.
So that sponsorship option project was 2 projects. It was the Inglewood School cleanup, and it's a green parking lot at 2nd Street.
Okay, so the Inglewood was $750,000 out of pocket?
Inglewood was $1 million through the sponsorship option loan.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And that's,
Have we used all the funds from the sponsorship option loan?
Not yet. We're
Yeah.
working on it. That's how we get our reduced interest for the,
Yeah.
the point source loans.
It was like 2.2 mil, wasn't it?
Well, the good memory. So
Yeah.
the 2.2 SO loan, that was for the plant 2 loan. And so, what we've done with that is we're working on the Front Street remediation and green parking lot. We did the culvert, bridge over at 6th Avenue. That's so far, we're working on that. Oh, and this year we're gonna do the third and central green parking lot.
Cool.
Thank you. I know that we work on it constantly. We hear about it, and I think our budget committee members appreciate hearing that, especially the new ones that may not know.
Thoughts, questions, concerns?
Carry on.
Yep, we can keep rolling then.
So then we'll go back to page 74, and that's the hotel motel tax fund. That's a revenue source of its own. That's derived through transient lodging tax, or more appropriately called hotel motel tax. That's a 9.5% fee that's charged to people that stay in short-term lodging, hotels, motels, vacation rentals and such. The use of those funds are highly regulated and stipulated by the state. Newer funds, 70% of that has to be dedicated to spending on tourism promotion or tourism facilities. Some of our fees date back prior to that, but we spend, if I have this correct, 55% of our funding goes to fund the Coos Bay North Bend Visitor and Convention Bureau, which also operates our Visitor Information Center. In addition to those funds, we spend funding to support tourism-related facilities such as the Marshfield Sun Museum, the Coos Art Museum, the Historic Railroad Museum, and the Egyptian Theater. And I would note that we own them all, although we do not operate them. Again, we use public-private partnerships and use nonprofits to operate them. I think you'll find as you go through our revenue on that one with carryover is almost 1.2 million. And then when you go over to personnel and to materials and services, you can see how that money is spent.
Are Airbnbs a part of this tax?
Yes.
Alrighty, page 76 is the expenditures. Anybody have questions? We can move on to the library.
Sorry, I do have one question. If there was a big, something like a boiler or something that broke at the art museum, would that be the responsibility of the city or the art museum?
It depends on, well, the city would be responsible for a large expenditure such as, we'll go with an actual, the city needed to replace a roof on the art museum a couple of years ago. That actually came out of what we would now call the building improvement grant program out of urban renewal.
It's the newspaper building, the old one. Sorry. He was asking which one the Sun building is, and I was trying to remember too. I think
It's
that's
the Marshfield Sun Print Museum.
Yep,
Square
that one.
salt box one? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that one. I couldn't recall either for a minute there. So library.
Good evening. So we're on page 77 of the document, and I'll just start off just with a brief funding explanation. The county does have a library taxing district, and that goes towards the operations of the 8 public libraries that are in the county. And there's a unique agreement with each library that the city provides the actual building, and the county taxing district provides the operation costs. So that's why there's we're a little bit of a different fund in that sense.
Sammy, can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
Just for the community?
Yeah.
So if the library bond were to pass, that would have zero effect on the funding of the other libraries in the in the
Correct,
fiscal, right?
yes, because the county is just strictly to operate it. Like I said, the cities are responsible for the buildings, so. So on page 78, just a couple things, you'll see on line 0900, the library tax base, that is that money from the county tax to operate the library, which pays for most everything that happens operating-wise.
Sammy, is that based on population size?
It is a formula that's sort of a combination of size, activities like circulation, visitors, and that kind of thing. It's sort of a multi-step formula that they figure out to do a percentage of that money each year. If you look down, also one revenue source that we no longer really have is auditorium rental, which is 1100. We used to rent out our large conference room for various things, but due to water damage and some really, well, most of it, some pretty bad damage, we just don't charge rent for it anymore. It's just not, we don't feel right about charging people for a room that's just not up to snuff. And moving down just a little bit further, 0300, you'll see ESO administrative rent. One of the features of the county system is that there is an office that runs sort of the larger county-wide system, or things like the van that runs around with the books every day. They take care of the databases for the entire county. So that is part of that administrative cost that they pay to the city to provide those services, because we are the fiscal agent for them. And any questions on that page before we go on?
I just have a general question. I've seen through the budget multiple times grants. Do you have a grant writer on staff? Not just you, I don't mean, I mean the city.
City? Oh, no.
You don't?
We've contracted out a few times, I think, though.
We have, yeah. But personally at the library, it is our staff that does most of it.
Did library fees go down? They were quite high in 1920.
Under the fees, we no longer charge fines for late fees, and that's what used to be a lot of that. Now, most of those fees are if damaged materials or materials that just never make their way back. So.
Sounds like we can go to page 79, expenditures.
Okay. So just one of the big changes there is under 2102, telephone and data plan. We did add a series of hotspots for patrons, and that is the increased price there, just monthly fees on those. That's to provide internet for people who don't have it at their places. And 2108, there was a slight increase in contractual there, mainly just increased prices. We're also going to have a couple projects we have planned, such as updating our website and things like that, so we built in some costs for that. And down under 2241 programming, we have bumped that back up since we are open more hours now and are offering more programs and kind of getting back to doing more of that. And 2309, this also kind of came up in the general city budget. We also have a line item here for building and grounds maintenance, where we do other repairs, and we have increased that because, as Roger pointed out, things like the HVAC have gone. Although that, we'll have a talk with the city about that one. What we cover under this one are a lot of the lighting issues or plumbing issues that aren't real big projects, but more small ones. And then the furniture under 2310, that's a fund that we started a few years ago, just putting aside a little bit each year, kind of, once again, one of those savings accounts, knowing we will need, things in the future for that. And usually when it goes, and it's not inexpensive, so.
Sorry, so we're not spending 200K this next year? Is that what you're proposing to spend?
On the furniture?
On the furniture.
At this point in time, it's just put away for savings for when we do need to buy new furniture.
Okay, thank you.
Much of the furniture we have is original.
Right. Okay.
Vintage, if you will.
Vintage, okay, thank you.
I think overall, the library fund is healthy.
Yeah.
We're fortunate that the voters of this county voted in a library service district. Without that, the reality is we probably wouldn't be able to provide library services because we probably couldn't afford the operational costs. But those library tax fees that we receive actually pay for the operations of that library.
Any other questions on 79? Okay, and just a couple more things on page 80. We do have a vehicle line item there, 3008. You see there's 60,000 in that. We inherited a, as I like to call it, our not so gently used police vehicle, but it's worked great until I think the transmission's going. So we are planning to get something else. We use that a lot for outreach, running around town and delivering things and that kind of stuff. So any questions on page 80?
Nicole, is the library not included in the lease program?
They are, and it should be moved up into a materials and services line item, so when we get to that point, and their vehicles are ordered and we're actually paying for them, we'll do a supplemental budget.
And now we will proceed on to page 89, which is that extended services office budget. And like I said, the city is the fiscal agent for that, but they do provide services, sort of an umbrella service to the whole county. On page 90, you'll see on line item 0900, that is the money that they receive from the taxing district, which then comes to the city to provide those services countywide.
This is in essence an in-and-out budget. The money comes from the county through the library service district and is paid to the city of Coos Bay to provide those services.
And so when you're not expending all of the funds, those, and I see some carry forward, but that's restricted to library.
Correct.
Yeah.
So any questions on page 90?
Hearing none, I think we can keep going.
Okay, page 91 are the expenses for that account. On 2108 is contractual. As a county, all the libraries have agreed to do a couple projects, and that's why that has gone up this year. We'll be doing some stuff that benefits everyone. And then, of course, 2228 is petroleum. We have our delivery van that goes 5 to 6 days a week, and so we did increase that amount just to cover the increased price. And 2204, other grant expenses. Usually ESO does not do grants, but due to COVID and some of the funds available, we were able to get a grant to do a countywide project there. And so that's why you don't see, it was sort of a unique thing, and which is why it's back down to 0 for next year.
I think we should also share that this budget's also been reviewed by the county
Correct.
library service district and the county commissioners.
Yeah, this is about the fourth body that has seen this budget and is looking at it.
So why is the library books and records fund down 10,000?
That's part of a change, and you'll see that contractual. They don't have as large of an actual physical collection, but they do manage the electronic collection for the libraries, and they've moved some of that money into under contractual for that and reduced their physical holdings.
Thoughts, questions, concerns?
And then 92, on 92, they also, 3008, have vehicles they save to replace them, and that will be moved up much like ours when it's time, so.
All righty, sounds quiet.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're good. How about building codes?
Building codes, page 81 and 82. By vote of taxpayers, this budget is mandated to be an enterprise fund with the revenue from permits fully supporting the related expenses. And personnel expenses are cost allocated for several personnel. and paid for by this program for complete cost accounting. So on page 82, this is the revenue side, the resources side.
Anything from anybody? The 83?
Page 83 is the expense side. See a little, that personnel services have gone down a bit. That's due cost allocation, and diminishing some employees that percentage of their salaries coming from this particular fund.
Sounding quiet.
On page 84 is the continuation of the end of the materials and services, capital outlay, transfer out, and the contingency.
It looks like transfer out got consolidated in one line instead of two. Is that what we did there?
Yes.
Cool.
And that's going through technology support. And then you can see we have an unappropriated ending fund balance of $50,000.
Well,
already.
We expect our salaries to go down.
No, it was just, as Fire Chief Anderson mentioned, one of our positions, our building official, is also now doing time in the fire department, so there was taken on 25% of that salary.
I had a question on your licensing and permits. I know you are conservative on your estimations, but it seems like there's a lot more building coming in. Do you think that might increase?
It certainly could.
Okay.
We're currently in the, well, we've just approved a 400-unit subdivision, although that's going to be a multi-year build-out.
Right. But if you look at the previous year's actuals, you would
We
end.
had some very large projects.
Okay.
The three schools were incredibly large.
Okay.
And one year for instance, the hospital, when it did a major expansion, that was a $40,000
Right. The clinics and things like that.
permit.
Okay.
It just really depends on the project.
Okay. Thank you.
So general obligation bond, this is one we touched on in the presentation, page 86. This is now, is the right page here?
87 for the numbers.
87 for the numbers. This is solely related to the bond for the downtown fire station. So basically you have revenue coming in, money that's being, taxes that are being levied to pay those obligations. And again, we're coming down to the twilight years of that bond.
Yeah, numbers are starting to be zero. But again, you'll keep seeing them because past years they existed, so until they drop off the end, you'll still see the line. Any questions on them? We can keep going. Or, well, actually that took us into the ESO.
Actually, we'll move over to page 93. There's a number of pages here that are only here because even though they're zeroed out, we're not using them. We have to keep them until all the numbers are off the actual year.
Yeah, so the
Page
special.
93 talks about that capital improvement fund, and it describes the funds that we combined into this one new fund. And it will be followed by system development fund. We did that same there. There's two SDC funds, we combined them. And then you're gonna have several pages which are inactive funds. They will be here historically reported.
So that's page
So-
93 to 102, is that right, Nicole, that are all zeroed out?
Yes. The first one that we're gonna get to that's not zeroed, I believe, is the jurisdictional. We talked about fire reserve, and we talked about water quality improvement.
Yep.
Nice, we're doing,
Is that page 103?
On page.
It's down here. So these are all those funds.
That's correct. So So jurisdictional exchange would be next, and that's page
108.
108.
Okay.
We have touched on that a couple times tonight. Again, that is the money that the city received from ODOT for taking on the formerly state-owned and managed highways that are inside the city. That does not include 101, but it does include streets like Ocean Boulevard, portions of Newmart, portions of South Empire Boulevard, Central, commercial in Anderson, but also sections over in East Side. This year, with the accumulated interest over several years, there's $320,000, and that has been put into the contractual item so that we can take on some street improvement projects on those formerly owned state highways. Not a lot of projects, because you know how much it costs to do street maintenance.
Yeah, 320 doesn't get us far.
No, but it will take care of more than a few potholes.
That's true.
Indeed.
Thoughts on that? Questions, concerns? Takes us to page 111 is the next set of numbers. We might have already talked about that.
Oh, so CAD is computer-aided dispatch. A number of years ago, the city was the financial or physical agent for a combined fund where a number of agencies put money in, and that was, we had a centralized computer-aided dispatch center that, or software that was shared by a number of agencies. Over time, that changed, and currently there are just 2 or 3 of agencies that pay into that, and that is currently the city of Coquille and the city of Coos Bay and the Popolo Indian Tribe. Basically, that's there as a future fund to repair or to replace core components of that hardware or upgrades to the software.
Not much to see there. Questions, concerns? That could take us to the rainy day fund.
Rainy day fund, as
That's
I mentioned.
113, sorry.
As I mentioned in the opening, that's a fund that was started in, I think, 2009, where we put 2.5% of the ending fund balance into in essence, a savings account that requires a supermajority of the council to spend. We have spent some of those funds in the past, but only as loans, and that money was paid back into that fund. It's truly there for when there isn't funds to do something that has to be done. So this year shows us putting in, or with your approval, $80,000. And there are no plans to expend that, although it remains in the budget as spendable in the event that there is an emergency.
So that's another one when things go entirely sideways. What was that?
So it seems reasonable.
Oh, sorry. Thought we had something there. All righty. If nobody's got anything, capital improvement fund.
So this is our large kind of catch-all for all of our capital projects across the city. And this is following the auditor's recommendation that we combine kind of like funds into one fund. There's a really a lot of things happening here as far as revenue sources and then the types of projects we're doing. Essentially, we have some street funds in here, some parks funds in here. Our technology is paid out of here. Timber sale revenue comes in here, so we're buying vehicles from this fund as well. That's kind of just a quick rundown of what you see in the resources page. The transportation utility fee sits in here. So on the next page is funds that are transferred in here from other funds, and then the historical closure in this current year of those other individual capital funds.
So that'd be the residual equities that
Yes.
closed out, moved
Those are all
around.
the funds that we closed.
Cool.
And then on the following page is the actual meat of where we're spending these funds. So, like I shared a little just a few minutes ago, the bulk of these funds are street improvements, park improvements, our technology is supported in this fund, and also vehicles and building improvements. And we can talk about any specific line item you might have interest in.
Yeah.
Do you track the transportation utility fees where they're spent at?
When we assign projects, I do believe we kind of look at those by projects. I don't know if you've seen some of our newsletters that this has been paid for by transportation utility fees, but it does come into a streets bucket. So
I just want to be sure that it's being spent
it is
only on
absolutely,
streets.
yes. So that is the challenge. This all came into one bucket as far as the fund goes. Melissa's team is doing some tracking outside of this in order to maintain that distinction between the resources of these funds. So we're meeting the auditor's request, but it is requiring some outside work.
Yeah, so I can safely say that none of the transportation utility fees are used to pay for personnel. It is all for street maintenance or capital improvements.
It can never be said enough. It
No.
still comes up.
And this fund does not have a personnel services in it, so that is the benefit of having it in this type of fund. You don't see any personnel costs.
Any other questions on this one?
Line 3170, construction of parks.
So that is intended to do some work with the pond, some dredging work there. We have some potential fishing possibilities there as well. It's kind of a continuation of a project that continues to go. We'll have to obviously get some grant funding for full completion, but
Are you talking about in John Toppett's Park?
this is in Mingus, sorry.
Mingus, okay.
Yeah.
And then I know we had talked about water quality issues in John Toppett's, and now that we're just potentially looking at it because we were worried about, all the groundwater and coming into, I think I'm saying that correctly, coming into the lake. So are we going to work on that next year, Roger?
I'm going to actually defer that. I know there's been some requests to do some water quality testing, and I don't know that we can actually do that in our lab or not.
Depends what we want to test for. So, we can talk about that. We have a certified lab, but it's the wastewater.
Yeah.
So, I'm not.
We can talk about it later. I just thought about it in the moment, so my apologies.
All righty.
Do we know where we're at with the spending on the construction of parks for our adopted budget?
I'll tell you. Yeah.
So that was based on grant funding?
Yes. Yeah, our last big expenditure in the parks was for the resurfacing of the pool.
Yes, that's
Yep.
what's in here, 199.
Anybody? All righty. We can keep her rolling. Oh.
So the
Yes.
last one is the SDC funds, and that is system development charges. And again, the city put a moratorium on that, and I want to say it was 2008, on charging that, although we have those funds, but these are highly regulated. System development charges in Oregon can only be spent on projects that increase capacity if it's in, let's say, stormwater, wastewater, or streets. And more than that, it can only be spent on projects that add capacity that's within a adopted plan. So some of these funds will be able to go to upcoming projects because they're already in the plan. But when that happens, we'll be able to transfer those out, and these will dwindle even more. But until that happens, we have to maintain those until they're have allowable expenditures.
If I remember right, we do agreements with some of the developers in lieu of SDCs, correct?
Yes, I think you could call them an impact fee.
Yeah.
So in lieu of a SDC for adding on, let's say, additional capacity for wastewater, we charge them a fee, and then we'll use those fees to do maintenance in that part of the collection system.
Yeah, so we get to be a little more flexible in how we meet the criteria and benefit the city more than an SDC would directly.
Correct.
These are basically leftover funds, aren't they?
They are. They were collected prior to 2009.
All righty. Questions on the leftovers? Yep. All righty.
So I think that takes us back to our first red line, and that was in community contributions. And if I remember correctly, Council President Miles was wanting to add funds into the discretionary line item.
Do we need a motion for that, Roger?
Well, I think there's got to be a motion from him and an amount.
Yeah, I would make a motion to appropriate $5,000 to, I don't have it in front of me,
It's
discretionary contributions?
2450.
2451, and reduce, is it carryover, 5,000?
Second?
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
The other one was related to, I believe, parks and contractual.
Yep.
2112.
Litter patrol.
Oh, sorry, yeah, litter
There it is.
beautification.
Page 53 on the document.
Number 2112. Councilor Miles, did you have an idea how much you wanted to increase that?
I mean, I don't know where it's gonna come from, but I'd like to see it go up to 130 or 140 instead of 110. I mean, we spent 140 in 2021. I don't know what's appropriate.
So where do we draw the money from if this goes up?
If it come out of contingency, I would just clarify, that's the same as carryover, but contingency is what we appropriate.
Okay.
How much have we spent this year, Jim?
112.
No.
As of the end of April, 97,000.
Do we know why we spent 140 in 2021, 2020, 2021?
I thought we talked about that was the cleaning of the camps, right? There were a
Oh,
lot
the
of...
bigger, the larger camps.
I
Yeah.
think there was that, and there was some additional efforts over the last couple of years to thin out underbrush.
Yeah.
I was just going to
But
say,
also
didn't we
related
do
to
quite a bit of underbrush cleaning in Toppets Park? And that's not as intensive as it would have been originally.
So if you want a suggestion, I would probably add 25,000 to that.
Does Councilor Matthews need to make that motion?
He does. Well, someone does.
I'd like to move that we increase line item or account number 2112 litter patrol and beautification from 110,000 to 135,000.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. And I think that brings us to the end of the proposed budget.
Correct. The next portion would be a motion to approve the permanent tax rate.
I'll make a motion to approve imposing the city's maximum permanent tax rate of $6.3643 per $1,000 taxable assessed value for fiscal year 2021-2022.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Just one.
Oh,
A point of order. We just need that motion amended for fiscal year 22-23.
oh,
So amended.
So seconded
Second.
amendment.
Does that work, or do I need to read it again?
No, you can amend it, but you'll need to do the vote again.
all still in favor?
Aye.
All possibly opposed? Motion passes. All righty.
The next motion will be in regards to the general obligation bond.
I make a motion to approve the imposing general obligation bonded debt amount of $549,667.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next one is to approve the proposed budget that we just ran through.
And I would just suggest that you approve it, of the proposed budget as amended.
Aye.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Nobody wants to oppose it, annoy it? All right, motion passes.
So I
Hour's
would
getting late.
like to take the opportunity to thank you for your service. I know we covered a lot of ground tonight. And I can just tell you that to get to where we are when we came to the meeting, it's probably several hundred hours of staff time to put that together. And I, for one, feel very blessed to have one of the best municipal staffs.
Well, I'd like to thank the staff. You make this really easy for us. I remember the first time I sat on the budget committee too, I was really intimidated, and then you just made it a really seamless and easy process. So my thanks to the staff for all of their work to make this good for us.
Agreed. Good job, y'all.
And I thank you for your accessibility when someone has questions so that we don't have to chew up the time here. Thank you so much for that.
And Drew, thank you for running the show.
Huh?
Thank you for running the show,
No.
Drew.
Yeah, good
I'm
job.
happy to. Meeting adjourned. Go home.
What am I supposed to do?
You never know, we're doing such a great job on that.
Yeah, you got a job, didn't you?
What is that?